I got loyalty, got royalty inside my DNA. I got cannabis, got war and peace inside my DNA. I got poison, pain, and joy inside my DNA.
Hello guys, welcome back to my channel The Fanfic Fantasy. Join us as we explore the world of fanfiction and fantasy and bring you the best story and discussions. This is the first part of What If Tanjiro Was Reborn as Yorichi? So give this video a like and subscribe for more videos in future. So let's get into the fanfic. Chapter 1, A Painful Awakening. Most people thought that Tanjiro Komado was the only one to survive the attack, but he died that day along with the rest of his siblings. As Tanjiro stared in wide-eyed horror at the shattered wooden front door, the blood-soaked floor and scramble of bodies dressed in familiar kimonos, the dearly loved face glassy-eyed, torn, and sullied by dark stains, another set of horrifying images downloaded into his brain. A small body curled up on the floor around an enormous dark stain. The cherished white ribbon, ripped and soaked in deep red. The dark green kimono slashed open at the back to expose mangled pale skin. The stillness in her stomach when he cradled her in his lap brought tears to his eyes. Worst of all were the eyes, glassy and empty of compassion, empty of the soul of his wife. In that moment, the life of Tanjiro Komado came to a traumatic end, and Yoriichi Tsugikuni woke up after 13 years of slumber. He'd been aware before, of course. No way he could have watched that dance and seen those earrings and not remember. Part of his mind had rebelled against his past life, though. In his life as the eldest son of a big loving family, Tanjiro had the peaceful life full of the affection his first time around had denied him. Tanjiro Komado had everything that Yoriichi Tsugikuni ever wanted. Now, as he stood looking down at the death of his family for the second time, Yoriichi felt overwhelming guilt. This time around, he'd known about the demons. He should have been able to keep his new family safe. But he'd stuck his head in the sand and they were all dead because of him. Then his eyes fell on Nezuko and his eyes widened. Her much-loved and often repaired pink kimono had blood stains on it. Blood trickled from close to her scalp as well. None of that surprised him, though. It was heart. He could see it beating, slowly and faintly, but still moving. Her lungs inflated slightly as well, showing that she was still breathing. Yoriichi's own heart skipped a beat because she was alive. Nezuko was alive. There was still a chance to save her. Carefully, Yoriichi pulled her off the tiny body of Ruda whom she had been shielding. He grabbed her arms and pulled her over his back, then began to run in a half-crouch. They needed a doctor, bandages to keep her from bleeding out, and medicine to help with the pain. If he got there fast enough then, today might not be the day all of his family died. In his past life, Yoriichi's speed left plumes of dust in his wake and his own body was never visible until he stopped. Now, his legs burned with effort and he was moving slow enough for anyone to see him. He was faster than the average boy his age would have been. Time chopping down trees with an axe had seen to that. But even a supernaturally strong body like his needed to be trained to sustain effort. And Yoriichi had done nothing for 13 years. The air was thin and the icy coldness of it burned his lungs. Yoriichi was struggling so hard that he almost didn't notice when his senses detected a demon right behind him. He let go of Nezuko seconds before her claws descended. She fell to the ground with an angry growl. Picking herself up, she bared at her teeth at him in a feral grin. No, Yoriichi thought, not again. For the second time in a row, my only sibling has become a demon. There wasn't time to think about the past, though, because Nezuko was on him. He slipped aside from her bite and hit her with the flat of the blade of the axe he had brought with him. Shaking her head, Nezuko blinked and staggered for a moment, then refocused on him. She attacked again and he hit her again. The pattern continued several more times, but Yoriichi knew it wasn't a stalemate. His new body's stamina was failing and he hadn't built up the endurance he needed for sun breathing or even total concentration breathing. Each time, he was a little slower and all Nezuko needed was to get him once. Once, he even stumbled and Nezuko had the perfect opening. She hesitated, however, and Yoriichi almost thought he saw tears in her eyes. Desperate, Yoriichi slipped behind her and caught her neck with the axe handle. Using his choke hold, he put pressure on her neck. Did demons need to breathe? Yoriichi had always thought so because he saw their lungs moving and most demons had foul breath that smelled like a mixture of rotting meat and sewage. He'd never tried to choke one out, though, so he was about to find out. Then another presence burst his senses. Seconds later, a blur of blue, black, and red came hurtling towards him and Nezuko. The brain and heart made it clear that this was a human, but what caught Yoriichi's attention were the lungs. They were stronger than most and had an even rhythm. One he had only ever seen in demon slayers using the breathing styles. Summoning up his strength, Yoriichi rolled to the side. He and Nezuko hit an incline then rolled over and over again in the snow. When they stopped, Yoriichi was on top. He pulled himself and Nezuko up, still using the handle to hold her neck, and then forced up against a tree. His back would protect her. Even the most bloodthirsty of demon slayers would never kill a civilian to get to a demon. At least, that had been true when Yoriichi was a part of the Corps. He'd have to trust that it had gone rotten in the time he'd been gone. Footsteps crunched on the snow and Yoriichi felt the demon slayer coming closer. He stopped 20 feet away and Yoriichi could see him out of the corner of his eye. The slayer looked surprisingly young for such a powerful presence. He had wild black hair pulled back into a ponytail and bright blue that narrowed as they looked at Yoriichi and Nezuko. "Why are you protecting it?" he asked coldly. "She's my sister," Yoriichi said. "I was taking her to get help." The slayer eyed him. Nezuko decided to contribute to the conversation by growling and scraping at the tree trunk like she wanted to escape by clawing her way through it. "You call that thing your sister?" the slayer commented. Yoriichi had no reply to that. He was too busy trying to keep a hold of Nezuko. She had pushed back against the tree and was now trying to elbow him in the ribs. Then the slayer moved. Yoriichi could see him watch every moment as swatted the axe aside with his sword and then grabbed Nezuko. His own movements, however, crawled like a snail. Yoriichi barely had time to jab his knee up in his own attack. The knee made only glancing contact with the slayer's stomach, but it was enough to net him a wary glance when the slayer came to a stop with Nezuko's arms held behind her back. "Don't move," the slayer said. "My job is to slay every demon I find, which means I have to decapitate your sister here." His voice was gruff and he was lacking in sympathy. Yoriichi also knew that he was right. Nezuko was a danger to human lives and should be taken out. As he looked at her, Yoriichi saw another child standing beside her. A boy who looked just like him, but without earrings and in finer clothes. He'd abandoned one sibling to the mercies of their inner demon before. Now he had a second chance and, this time, he refused to let it happen. Yoriichi examined the slayer in front of him. He didn't have the strength to take someone on at that level, not yet. So his best option was to work it out. "Nezuko hasn't eaten anyone. My entire family was killed by a demon, but there was think of a lie. You can't say that you sense Muzan or he'll never believe you another scent. One I'd never smelled before. There must have been another one who did it. I don't know why she has turned, but she would never eat a human." The slayer looked unimpressed. "She turned because her wounds were infected with demon blood. She'd never eat a human. What would have happened if I had been a little bit later? She'd have devoured you." "You are wrong," Yoriichi said, desperate. "She knows I'm her big brother, so she'd never hurt me. I won't let her eat anyone. I'll turn her back into a human. I will heal her. She can't be turned back. Once you become a demon, you can never be healed," the slayer stated flatly. "I'll find a way," Yoriichi protested. "I'll track down the demon who slaughtered my family and kill him, and I'll turn her back." The slayer, however, appeared to be through with listening. He raised his sword and prepared to deliver a slash that would take Nezuko's head from her shoulders. He should have known talking wouldn't work. Not like he'd ever been any good at it anyway. So when Yoriichi knelt in the snow and begged the slayer not to kill his little sister, he wasn't expecting it to work. No, his aim was to covertly grab several of the small stones on the ground. The action appeared to anger the slayer and he yelled at Yoriichi about begging being useless. He scolded him for being too weak to protect his sister. Every word struck Yoriichi like a physical blow. All of this was his fault. He'd been so focused on his selfish dream that he'd let it all happen again. Weakness was a new experience. In his past life, Yoriichi had been stronger than anyone else. Part of that was natural ability, but he had also worked himself to and past the point of exhaustion so that he could be a pillar strength. So he would be the best. Now he couldn't even give one slayer a mild challenge. Yoriichi gritted his teeth. He didn't have time for this. Wallowing in his own weakness would doom Nezuko. As the slayer drew breath to continue his rant, Yoriichi sprang up and flung a stone at the slayer's face. He blocked it as Yoriichi had known he would. The second rock hit just as the slayer started to move his blade, and then the third. The speed of his counters should have worried Yoriichi, but he felt himself growing confident. It was still there, that one tell most of the slayers had. Right before they moved, they always drew in extra air to send to parts of their body so their lungs expanded a fraction more. If not for the transparent world and Yoriichi's knowledge of breathing techniques, he never would have known. But he did, and now he put that knowledge to use. A third and fourth rock pelted towards the slayer's eyes. When the fifth didn't come, the slayer lowered the blade and found Yoriichi mere inches in front of him. Yoriichi punched the slayer in the solar plexus. Breathing techniques or not, the solar plexus was always vulnerable. He'd found that out once when a clever demon had used it. Sure enough, the slayer hunched over as the air was pushed from his lungs. With all his strength, Yoriichi brought the wooden handle of the axe down on the fingers of the slayer's sword hand and he dropped it. Once last hard whack to the arm holding Nezuko, and Yoriichi was sprinting away with his sister in tow. Unfortunately, they didn't get far. The Slayer appeared with his sword back in his hands and slammed the hilt down on the back of Yoriichi's head. Yoriichi crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Nezuko and the Slayer stared down at Yoriichi in shock. Those rocks weren't a reckless attack, the Slayer realized. He threw them so I would be forced to hold my sword in front of my face and block my view. The timing for each one was perfect and it let him hit me. He compromised my breathing so he could disarm me. This kid, the Slayer, was so distracted that he didn't block in time when the demon girl leaped over her brother and kicked him in the chest. He flew backwards several feet and looked up to see the demon standing over the boy. Instead of taking a bite, though, she put herself in front of him and began to growl. Then she attacked the Slayer. As he defended against her attacks, the Slayer wondered if maybe this demon was different from all the others like the boy her brother was. Sheathing his sword, the Slayer hit the demon with a chop to the throat. For a moment, he looked down at the two unconscious siblings and then came to a decision. He took a paper and pen from his Haori, then started to write. Urokodaki set down his cup of green tea and picked up the letter Kanzabiru had just delivered. The old crow was currently passed out in a corner on the floor, dozing after his long flight. The old man turned the letter over in his hands for a moment. Jiu so rarely wrote to him that it almost didn't seem real to him. Carefully, Urokodaki slid a finger under the seal and opened the envelope. Then he drew out the sheet of paper inside. The letter was short by most people's standards, only a full page, but by Jiu's standards it was positively overflowing. Dear Urokodaki sir, forgive the intrusion. There's a boy headed your way in need of instruction. He wants to be a demon slayer. He was fearless enough to try to attack me. A demon attacked his family. They are all dead, except for his younger sister who has been turned. But I am certain she will not attack a human. They are different. I can sense something about these two. The boy has a keen sense of smell much like yourself and a better head for fighting tactics than many I've seen. He also seems to move faster and be a bit stronger than most. So maybe, just maybe, he'll be able to find a way through. I am asking for you to train this boy. This may seem like a frivolous request, but please humor me. If I'm not mistaken, this will all make sense one day. Take care of yourself. I am fine. Yours truly, Jiu Tomioka. Urokodaki smiled beneath his mask. From that last line, it seemed the boy got the letter he sent last New Year's, though why he waited nearly an entire year to answer was anyone's guess. The smile faded and Urokodaki ran a finger along the line about the request. The only thing rarer than a letter from Jiu was for Jiu to ask for a favor. The last one he'd asked for was shortly after Sabito died. He'd been silent for months only to ask for half of Sabito's Haori out of the blue and some needle and thread. To ask for something now, though. The boy must be special indeed, Urokodaki mused. He must have made quite the impression on my student. After setting the letter down, Urokodaki grabbed his scarf, then wrapped it around his head. He picked up his sword and, pausing briefly to set Kanzabiru down on some old blankets, proceeded out the door to meet the boy who had caught the eye of his student. Yoriichi pointed to a basket lying next to a hut. Would you mind if I took that basket and some straw and bamboo? He asked. The farmer squinted at him and scratched one ear. The basket was no use to him, sure, but the blank look on the boy's face was strange. What did he want with a basket like that anyway? And bamboo and straw. He was about to tell the strange boy to leave when he suddenly darted forward and slightly past the farmer and at his wife. He snatched something off the ground and held it up in two hands. A yellow and brown snake hissed in anger, trying to sink its fangs into the boy. Its efforts were in vain. The boy held its body just behind the head and was impossible to reach. The boy drew his arm back and flung it. The snake sailed into the air and several yards into the forest, still hissing in fury as it went. Sorry, Yoriichi said. I prefer not to kill them unless it is needed. The farmer stared at him. That snake had blended perfectly in with the soil. He and Tsumaki would never have seen it until it bit one of them. The boy had just saved his wife's life. You can have the basket, the farmer said, and all the bamboo and straw you want. Yoriichi bowed. Thank you. I'll gladly pay you for it. No, it's fine. Same for the straw and bamboo. But let me pay you, Yoriichi insisted. I said the man began, but was interrupted as Yoriichi slammed several coins into his palm. The farmer was still holding his wrist as Yoriichi thanked him again and headed off with the basket, bamboo, and straw. Crazy, stubborn kid, the farmer complained. When Yoriichi found Nezuko, she was deep in a hole she'd dug in the cave Yoriichi had left her in. Seems you already know what to do, Yoriichi mused. Maybe all demons now instinctively the sun will kill them. Hang on just a second, Yoriichi said. Using his axe, Yoriichi split the bamboo and wove it tightly around the basket. He He packed straw in every crevice and put some in the bottom of the basket so Nezuko would be comfortable. When he finished, Yoriichi entered the cave with the basket. "Nezuko, do you think you could fit in here?" Yoriichi asked. "I want to keep moving during the day, so I'll need to carry you." Nezuko looked back at him with wary, Sakura blossom pink eyes. "Does she understand what I am saying?" Yoriichi wondered. How much can demons understand? He'd never really talked much with a demon. Most of them limited their conversation to boasting about their skills. Those demons went down easy for the most part. The occasional demon would beg for their life or try to bargain. Those demons died quickly too, but Yoriichi much preferred a monster treating him like dinner than one who begged like a human would. To sum it up, he knew some demons were intelligent and understood words, but how much did they understand? Where did Nezuko, a recently made demon, fall on that scale? Yoriichi tried again. "In here, basket," he said slowly. Nezuko grunted and climbed out of the hole, then shoved herself face first into the basket. Right away Yoriichi could see a problem. Only half of Nezuko fit. Then Yoriichi remembered how Nezuko had grown bigger all of a sudden when attacking him. "Do you think you can get smaller?" Yoriichi asked. No response from the demon kid sister. Yoriichi went back to his previous tactic. "Come on, get smaller for me, Nezuko," he said, patting her on the back. "Get smaller for me." Nezuko shoved herself into the basket, shrinking as she went, and it tipped upright. Soon she was sitting curled up inside it with her knees against her chest. "Nice job, Nezuko. Who's a good girl?" "You are Nezuko. I'm impressed," Yoriichi said, patting her head. Then he froze. "I am talking to my kid sister like she's a dog," Yoriichi thought. Odder still, Nezuko was making pleased sounds and closing her eyes. It seemed he would have to keep talking to her like that until she changed back into a human and let him know she didn't like what he was doing. Yoriichi pulled out a cloth and wrapped around the basket like a top. After making sure it was tight, he took the basket from the cave, shouldered it, and continued on his way towards Mount Sajiri. Now that the problem of Nezuko and the sun was solved for the moment, he found himself thinking about the Demon Slayer Corps. It was ironic that after being excommunicated from the Corps in his first life, he was about to try to join it again. Should he even be allowed to join again? Did excommunication extend beyond death to rebirth? Yoriichi decided he should just go by his new name, Tanjiro Komado, and pretend not to be a reincarnation. Not like the excommunication would come up if he did that way. It also reduced the chances of Muzan finding him while he was still weak. Muzan Kibutsuji, progenitor of demons. If Yoriichi had killed him in his last life, then his second family would still be alive. The sins of his past life had followed him through to his new one, and now others had paid the price. Maybe his reincarnation was a punishment from whatever gods existed, for failing his purpose before and letting the demon get away. Yoriichi would kill him, needed to kill him in order to atone, and that meant joining the Demon Slayer Corps. It also meant hiding his identity, partly because Muzan was cowardly and would go into hiding if he thought a threat to his life had appeared. Also, because Muzan was clever enough to have Yoriichi hunted down by the upper moons before he could reach full strength again. The thought of seeing Mikatsu again made Yoriichi's heart wrench. He couldn't face him again. Not now. So it was settled. Yoriichi would be Tanjiro Komado and no one would be the wiser. It would mean hiding his ability to see the transparent world. No one else had that ability as far as he knew, and learning the breathing techniques like a novice would. He had no choice, though. Towards evening, Yoriichi stopped and asked a woman standing outside a house for directions. "Mount Sajiri. If you really want to go there, the fastest way is over that mountain," she said, pointing. "But sun's about to set and you're hauling an awful lot of luggage. It's dangerous. Please don't worry. I'll be careful," Yoriichi said. "A lot of people have been going missing on that mountain lately. Don't get lost." "Okay," the woman called. Night fell. Nezuko climbed out of the basket and took Yoriichi's hand. Yoriichi was startled and didn't know what to do at first. He kept looking at her hand as if expecting it would vanish. But Nezuko smiled at him, or gave him the closest to a smile she could manage with a muzzle, and swung their joined hands cheerfully. The night was peaceful and quiet. Then Yoriichi felt the presence of a demon. The presence wasn't large, nowhere close to an upper or even lower moon. But it wasn't small either. Warily, Yoriichi gripped his axe and asked Nezuko to be quiet. A temple appeared and together they creeped up to the door of it and looked in. A demon crouched on the floor of the temple, feasting from several corpses. It has long, human-like hair, pale skin, and stripes on both arms. Yoriichi shifted his grip on the axe. The axe was ordinary iron, not Nikirin. He didn't know he'd be able to hurt the demon at all with it, much less kill it. But he had to try, didn't he? For the sake of those men lying dead on the floor. Nezuko took a step forward and a floorboard creaked. The demon froze and looked over its shoulders. "What do you think you're doing?" "This is my territory," the demon said. Anyone who set foot on my territory is going to have to pay. Out of the corner of his eye, Yoriichi could Nezuko staring the bodies. Drool began to run in small rivulets beneath her muzzle. She was starving and what was on the floor was a feast. Huh? The demon said, getting to its feet. Something is not quite right about you. Wait, are you too human? Yoriichi tightened his grip on the axe. Without warning, the candle, the only light in the temple, went out and the demon flung itself at him. Yoriichi leaped back and swung, scoring a long slash on the demon's torso. Yoriichi landed on the ground outside the temple and the demon followed. Hoo-hoo, a hatchet, the demon noted as it touched down. Not bad, kid. Just a little scratch, though. Should heal in no time. As he spoke, the cut Yoriichi had made healed. The demon grinned and looked up just in time to see Yoriichi swing again. The demon swayed backwards and the axe blade passed with inches of his neck. You got lucky, kid, the demon snarled. It won't happen again. I am going to snap your neck, it said. The demon charged at him and Yoriichi barely managed to jump out of the way. He swung the axe and forced the demon to come at him again. In that moment, Yoriichi dearly missed his breathing techniques. He tries to do the second flame form with that last swing, scorching rising sun. But his lungs clearly weren't strong enough yet and his muscles didn't know what the form looked like even though his brain did. Worst of all, he had no Nichiren sword. The demon could just keep coming at him until Yoriichi tired and then it would be all over. The demon went in for a grab, stooping low and a blur of pink and black dove for him. Nezuko appeared and swung a kick that sent the demon's head rocketing off his shoulders and against a tree. Well, that was one way to decapitate a demon, Yoriichi supposed. He eyed the currently headless body and wondered if this would be enough to kill the demon. It hadn't been a Nichiren sword, after all, so maybe. The body stood up and started to attack again. Yoriichi raised his axe, but Nezuko kicked the demon's body and sent it flying up against another tree far away from its head. You bastards, the demon head shouted. So the girl's a demon after all, huh? I couldn't tell with that weird vibe you gave off. But what are you doing teaming up with a human? He's still talking, Yoriichi noted. And why is your face so blank? Don't you feel anything at all? The demon demanded, glaring at Yoriichi. Yoriichi blinked. He'd forgotten about that. Smiling had been so easy when he was Tanjiro that he hadn't realized he wasn't doing it anymore. This is just my face, Yoriichi said. The demon snarled and its body leaped from the tree to attack Nezuko. Yoriichi started to intervene, but sensed the demon head making a move. He turned around just in time to see that the head had grown 2 stubby arms and was flying through the air towards him. After pulling back his arm, Yoriichi swung and hit the head, sending it flying like a ball in a children's game. It fetched up against a tree for the second time. Before the head could fall to the ground, though, Yoriichi threw the axe. The blade dug through the forehead of the demon and into the wood beyond, pinning the head to the trunk like a poster on a corkboard. Yoriichi turned in time to see the demon send Nezuko sailing through the air into the forest and out of sight. He chased after the demon's body, shouting his sister's name. The demon's body entered the clearing by the cliff moments before Yoriichi did. But that didn't stop it from kicking and hitting Nezuko, continuing the beating. Without a Nichiren sword or even his axe, Yoriichi knew he didn't stand a chance of cutting the body up. Wrestling it to the ground wouldn't work either. That left one option. As soon as the demon's body separated from Nezuko for a moment, Yoriichi charged at it. At the last second, Yoriichi turned so that he slammed into it side-on instead of head-on. The demon's body was knocked backwards and off the cliff. Yoriichi, however, managed to grasp a tree near the edge of the cliff and halt himself. His arms shrieked in protest and the tree shook, but it held. He let go of the tree and sat down, hard. Partly because of exhaustion, but also because he had just taken on a small fry of a demon and he'd almost lost. In his previous life, he'd killed demons far more powerful in a single stroke. They'd never even been a mild challenge. Now though, Yoriichi shook his head. The only reason he was still breathing now was because of the physical strength he'd been blessed with in both this and his past life and his previous experience. Even with those, though, he might still have lost if not for the cliff. In short, he'd been lucky. A small soft hand rested on top of Yoriichi's head. He looked up to see Nezuko, clothing slightly scratched, but otherwise unharmed from her first demon fight. The look of worry in her pink eyes reminded him that he wasn't just in this for himself. Now wasn't the time for pity parties. Thank you, Nezuko, Yoriichi said. I'm fine. Nezuko nodded and her eyes brightened. She held out her hand and helped Yoriichi to his feet. This isn't over, Yoriichi told her. We still need to take care of the head, so stay sharp. The two siblings made their way back to the temple and its courtyard. Yoriichi held up a hand on the edge of the tree line. He pulled out his knife, then peered around a tree at the head and saw that it was still struggling to pull the axe out of its skull with its small arms and hands. It didn't appear to be planning anything, so Yoriichi stepped out into the courtyard and walked towards it, Nezuko trailing behind him. Halfway to the head, Yoriichi felt a presence, calm and quiet but awash with power and confidence. A quick glance out of the corner of his eye revealed a brain, heart, lungs, and other internal organs of a human being. The lungs were big and muscular, definitely a slayer, if not a former Hashira. So he was hiding behind a tree. That must mean he wanted to see what Yoriichi would do. Yoriichi reached the head. Sheathing his knife, he reached down to grab a rock. He bowed his head for a moment. No, the demon's head said, "Please, I'll be good. I'll protect humans instead of eating them, I'll." The rock slammed into the demon's skull 3 times on each side. When Yoriichi let the bloody pieces of rock fall, bloody pulp hung where the demon's head should have been. A hand far larger than Nezuko's fell on Yoriichi's shoulders. Yoriichi turned to see a man in a blue kimono embroidered with clothes and came face to face with the red Oni mask he was wearing. That moment before you crushed it, the one where you bowed your head, what were you doing? Urokodaki asked. I was praying for his soul. He was human once, so I wished for it to rest in peace, Yoriichi said. Urokodaki had guessed something like that already. The overwhelming scent of kindness coming off of the boy in that moment had made him worry that the boy wouldn't be able to go through with the kill. When the demon began to beg, Urokodaki was almost sure that the boy would let it go. The boy's words now confirmed Urokodaki's opinion that he was far too kind. But there was still a problem with that thought. Why did you kill it? Urokodaki said. If you are so sympathetic, why kill it when it was begging for mercy? Yoriichi met his eyes and Urokodaki almost thought for a moment that the boy could see through the mask. Letting it live wouldn't have been a mercy. The person he was would never have wanted to continue on this way. Besides, it is almost sunrise, Yoriichi said. He pointed behind the temple to where the rosy pink of dawn was beginning to lighten the sky. Leaving him to burn would have been far worse. Mercy, that fit with his kindness, but few people had quite that perspective. He had an answer to his question, but still nowhere close to getting a handle of the boy. His nose and instincts normally didn't lie. Now that he thought about it, though, the boy's scent was faint. Fainter than any living thing Urokodaki had ever smelled. Just who did you send me, Jiuo? Urokodaki wondered. Yoriichi looked away and then blinked. Nezuko, where are you? He asked. He had to be worried, but his tone and face were blank. Yet another oddity to add to the growing tally. Yoriichi's eyes landed on the open temple doors and he relaxed. Nezuko was inside the temple, curled up in her basket with the blanket draped over her head like a hood. That wasn't the only thing that was off, though. Where are the bodies? Yoriichi asked. Did you need something from? Urokodaki asked. No, Yoriichi admitted. I just wanted to ... to make sure they were taken care of. Urokodaki watched him for a moment and then gestured for Yoriichi to follow him. Around the back of the temple were 3 fresh graves without headstones or markers. Yoriichi realized that Urokodaki must have buried them while he and Nezuko had been by the cliff. He could have killed the demon at any time, Yoriichi realized, but he left it for me to deal with, to test me. Staring down at the graves, Yoriichi remembered Yuta's grave, the one Rengoku had helped him dig and then decorate with flowers. More recently, he remembered the graves he'd dug for his family. Getting onto his knees, Yoriichi folded his hands and prayed for a peaceful afterlife for the victims, one without pain or sorrow of any kind. A rustle in the grass a moment later showed him that Urokodaki was doing the same. When they had both finished, they rose and Urokodaki turned to Yoriichi. My name is Sakonji Urokodaki. You are the one that Jiu Tomioka sent to my way. Correct? It wasn't a question. Not really. Yoriichi wasn't surprised at the revelation either. Some answer was clearly expected, though. I'm Tanjiro Komado, Yoriichi said, and then he pointed towards the temple. And my sister's name is Nezuko. Tanjiro, Urokodaki said, his voice flat. What do you intend to do if your sister eats a human? Yoriichi didn't flinch or hesitate. He'd been thinking about it for a while. What he would do if he failed again and his sibling turned into a monster for the 2nd time. I'll kill her, Yoriichi responded. And then myself. The masked head tilted slightly in a clear question. Nezuko would never want me to let her live if it meant others died. As for myself, my life would be forfeit in exchange for the ones taken. I don't believe it will ever come to that, but if it does, I will have failed. More than I did even after Muzan escaped. I won't deserve a second chance, Yoriichi thought. Then I will do what has to be done. Yoriichi finished. You must never allow that to happen, no matter the cost, Urokodaki said. Traveling alongside a demon like your sister means that you are not only risking your life and hers but that of everyone around you. Your sister eating an innocent human is the one thing that must never happen. ever. Have I made myself clear? Yoriichi dipped his head in response. In spite of the heaviness of the topic, of the discussion of losing the only family he had left, the boy hadn't shed a tear or even frowned. Urokodaki couldn't help but compare Tanjiro's expression to Jiyu's constant mask of indifference. No, Jiyu's indifference always had a twinkle behind it. The emotions were clearly there, just hidden out of sight. Tanjirou Komado, though, the serene blankness on his face obscured all traces of emotion. Either the boy was an idiot or he felt nothing. There was a third option, that he had been through so much and was hiding so much that he had learned to seamlessly make all signs of emotion disappear. Very well, I will test you to see if you are worthy to become a member of the Demon Slayer Corps. Carry your sister and follow me. The rest of the day was a blur for Yoriichi. Urokodaki ran at a pace that couldn't have been his fastest. Yoriichi knew he was holding back, but was still merciless. Every time Yoriichi gained a little bit of ground, Urokodaki sped up more, forcing him to push harder. Even with his enhanced physical strength, Yoriichi was panting by the time they reached the small house with the wooden roof at the foot of the mountain. While he knew it couldn't be true, Yoriichi hoped that this would be end of the test. As if he knew what Yoriichi was thinking, Urokodaki turned. This is only the start of the test. We'll be climbing a mountain, he said. Yoriichi took a couple deep breaths and then asked, do I bring Nezuko with me? No, Urokodaki said. He pulled off his headscarf, revealing short silver-white hair, then opened the door to the house. She will stay here, he said. Yoriichi hesitated. Separating him from Nezuko was the easiest way to kill her, after all. There'd be nothing he could do until too late. For a moment, he just looked at Urokodaki, face impassive. I promise I will look after her, Urokodaki said. After studying the man's heart, lungs, and presence for any sign of deception, Yoriichi entered the house and set Nezuko's basket down on the floor. He took off the cloth and found her fast asleep. She didn't stir as he picked her up and laid her down on the floor with a nearby folded cloth to serve as a pillow. When Nezuko was comfortable, Yoriichi rose and followed Urokodaki outside, onto the mountain. Unlike earlier, Urokodaki went at an easy pace. He probably didn't want to tire Yoriichi out too much before the test started. As they climbed higher and higher, Yoriichi found it harder to breathe. He didn't wheeze or pant. To all appearances, his breathing was normal. Urokodaki, however, could smell the sweat trickling down Yoriichi's back and the extra carbon dioxide as the boy's lungs heaved. No matter how he acted, it seemed that Tanjiro Komado was not untouchable. Near the top of the mountain, Urokodaki halted. Night had long since fallen and mist swirled around him and his prospective student. What little light from the stars came on this moonless night was almost entirely obscured by the trees. Now, find your way back to my house at the foot of the mountain, Urokodaki instructed. This time, I won't wait until daybreak. He stepped back into the mists and disappeared from view. Ordinary view, anyway. Through the transparent world, Yoriichi could still see his internal organs getting smaller and smaller. I could follow him, Yoriichi thought. If I did that I'd pass with no issue. How to explain it, though? Could he say he smelled Urokodaki and use that to track him? In the end, Yoriichi decided that his best move was to wait until he couldn't see Urokodaki, and then make his own way. He needed to train to be stronger, not take the easy way out at every opportunity. Nezuko was counting on him to do more than test well, after all. He started to head down, at a fast, but easily maintainable pace. That was why when he tripped over the first rope, he didn't fall forward and managed to dodge the rocks rather than taking them to the face. Traps, Yoriichi thought. There must traps all over the mountain. Out of all the tests Urokodaki could have chosen, this one was by far the worst. Insight into the transparent world gave Yoriichi advantages at so many things, but detecting traps wasn't one. Traps weren't alive, so there was nothing for him to see in the transparent world. No clear giveaway. I wanted a challenge, Yoriichi thought dryly. I guess this is what I get. Heading for the nearest tree, Yoriichi grabbed a branch and twisted until it snapped. Then he started heading down again, this time poking the ground ahead of him with the stick. The method saved him from several pitfalls, but he was still hitting tripwires every time. After barely dodging a hit from a swinging log, Yoriichi knew he needed to change his tactics somehow. He looked down at the swinging log, trying to think of some way he could detect traps like it. While his senses were keen, he did not actually have the super-sensitive nose that he pretended to. If he did, he could have smelled Urokodaki's scent on the traps, but with only the transparent world he couldn't. Yoriichi blinked. What if he could, though? Urokodaki had set the traps at some point. He must check them regularly too, if he'd been at them for long enough. It wasn't something Yoriichi had tried before, not even in his past life, but maybe, just maybe. Narrowing his eyes, Yoriichi focused on the log. He envisioned Urokodaki, his normal appearance and that in the transparent world. A faint shimmer, residue from Urokodaki's aura, clung to the rope behind him and to the log. Yoriichi took a deep breath. He was still in this, there was still a chance. When he broke into a run this time, he was concentrating harder on his surroundings than he ever had before. He jumped over a rope at ankle height, slid to avoid one at chest height, and jumped over a pit trap. The world dissolved around him into wisps of calm, strong presence, and the ground beneath his feet. When the wisps vanished entirely, Yoriichi almost didn't recognize what had happened. Then his focus snapped back into his body and he recognized the small house, light flickering in its windows. The moon was much closer to the horizon than it had been, but it still hung in the sky. He had passed Urokodaki's test and done so with hours to spare. Yoriichi dropped the stick and pushed open the door. Urokodaki was inside with a cauldron of something over a fire. He'd put Nezuko on a futon and tucked a blanket around her. Urokodaki said nothing as Yoriichi entered and then shut the door behind him. He sat down by Nezuko and propped his back up against the wall. "You've passed," Urokodaki informed him finally. "You are now my new student, Tanjirou Komado." Yoriichi nodded. His face could have been made of stone for all the emotion he showed. As Urokodaki looked at him, he knew he was looking at his most tragic mistake, or the one deed that would make up for everything he had ever done wrong. Yoriichi looked down at Nezuko and wondered if he had lost his only remaining was already gone for good. She lay on her futon, eyes closed, skin porcelain pale, and form so still she looked like stone. When he focused his vision on the transparent world, he could see that her heart was still beating, albeit a slower than normal tempo. Her lungs still expanded slightly as they took in oxygen and pumped carbon dioxide out. For the first time, Yoriichi found himself grateful for his strange second sight. If not for it, he might already have assumed his sister to be dead. As he exited her small room and carefully slid the door to her small room shut, Yoriichi still felt worried, though it didn't show on his face. He'd never seen anyone sleep like that before, and she'd been doing for almost 2 days now. Was it possible she was in a coma? He'd never seen anyone in a coma before. "It is time to go," Urokodaki said. His words brought Yoriichi back to the present. Wordlessly, Yoriichi turned and followed Urokodaki out the door and onto the mountain nearby. As they climbed, Urokodaki began to give a lecture on the origin of the Demon Slayer Corps and its purpose. Yoriichi listened without comment or expression, but laughed at the irony inside the privacy of his thoughts. He knew the origin of Corps all right, better than Urokodaki ever could. Yoriichi lived through the dark days before breathing styles were introduced, when the Corps was just discovering that Nichiren swords worked on demons and the wisteria flower affected the demons badly. They didn't know where demons had come from. Yoriichi knew all right, though. It was more of a who than a where, and the Corps' leader did as well. That clued Yoriichi into the fact that he was getting an edited version of the truth about demons and the Corps. It made sense since he was not a full member yet, but the deception irritated him a little. Announcing the existence of demons in Kibutsuji would create mass panic. Yoriichi accepted that. What was the harm in telling people already in the know about demons the truth, though? It was one of the few points where he and the master had disagreed in the past, and it would seem that he and the current master of the Demon Slayer Corps would do the same. When the duo neared the top of the mountain, Urokodaki stopped and began to explain to Yoriichi the training process and the final test to enter the Corps. The existence of other trainers and style wasn't new, but final selection was. In Yoriichi's day, anyone who survived a demon attack and kept their wits was offered the chance to join. Others with the necessary sword skills and passion were evaluated by the higher-ranked slayers, then given a sword and place in the Corps if deemed worthy. An actual selection process. Yoriichi wondered what it would entail. Before he got there, though, he had to train and regain some of his strength. There was also one more obstacle. "I decided whether you will undertake the challenge or not," Urokodaki said. His tone was level as he spoke, but Yoriichi heard the firmness in it and saw the older man's chin lift. That meant Urokodaki was planning to be stubborn about his consent, either because he had high standards or wasn't going to give Yoriichi permission. Ever. Yoriichi had to hope that it was the former, or that he could at least change Urokodaki's mind. The next few days were a repeat of the first test. Yoriichi ran down the mountain, sometimes during the day and other times at night. The route Urokodaki took him to get up the mountain was always different, and the direction he was instructed to go always varied. The constant, though, was the presence of traps, pitfalls, tripwire, snares. Urokodaki was endlessly inventive when it came to traps, and that unpredictability kept Yoriichi constantly on edge. On the upside, his ability to sense the lingering traces of a presence and perception within the transparent world were growing sharper and sharper. He could also feel his lungs expanding, strengthening, and his heart beginning to beat more strongly. On the downside, the traps were getting more and more deadly. Actual blades were being incorporated now. Only some of them were blunt. After narrowly escaping a particularly nasty hidden pit with sharpened spears at the bottom, Yoriichi stared at it and sweat dropped. "I am starting to wonder if Urokodaki wants me dead," he muttered. A couple of times while he was running down the mountain, Yoriichi saw Urokodaki watching from behind a tree or a boulder. The first time Yoriichi spotted him, nearly veered into a trap because he thought it was another vestige left on a trap. If he hadn't realized it was too strong to be won a split second before he stepped on that rock, Yoriichi would have been pounded into the ground by a log from above. After the first time, though, Yoriichi started to ignore the larger traces of presence and focus on the fainter one. While Yoriichi would like to think that Urokodaki was hovering nearby to give medical aid, he was sure it had more to do with evaluating his progress. For his part, Urokodaki was mystified by Tanjiro's progress. Jiwoo and Sabito had avoided traps with the same grace, but they'd done so later on in their training. He was sure that he hadn't made finding the traps too easy. Some were liberally dabbed with his scent, especially the more dangerous ones, but others he'd been careful to keep all scent off. Yet Urokodaki's newest student was avoiding all of the traps for the most part. The last time he'd been hit by one was day 4, and Urokodaki was willing to bet that one had been an unlucky stumble on Tanjiro's part. Then there were the animals. Urokodaki tried to set up his traps so that only a big animal like a bear or a person would trigger them. He was fine with killing animals for food, but doing it out of carelessness was different. Unfortunately, some animals still hit traps despite his best efforts. At the end of his first week, Tanjiro had suddenly halted in the middle of his run for no apparent reason. He'd then darted off into a clump of bushes and disappeared from his teacher's sight. Moments later, he reappeared with a fox pup under one arm. The creature was bleeding from one of his legs. A faint coppery tinge of blood scented the air, but even Urokodaki could only smell it when he knew what he was looking for. How had Tanjiro been able to find it in the middle of a run? Was his nose keener than Urokodaki's own? Tanjiro had taken out the water bottle he kept in his hayori and carefully cleaned the fox's cut. He'd then taken out a clean white handkerchief, tore a strip from it, and wrapped it around the fox pup's leg. Throughout the whole process, the fox remained still, as if it somehow knew it could trust the human holding it. Tanjiro had then disappeared into the bush again and reappeared without the fox to continue his run. That was the only time Urokodaki had seen Tanjiro help an animal, but he knew the boy had to be doing the same with other animals. If only because Tanjiro started carrying certain herbs with him that would stop infection. As he'd thought when he first met the boy, Tanjiro was kind. Perhaps he was too kind to hunt and kill demons. Yet there had still been that moment where they met. Tanjiro had smashed the demon's head without hesitation and seemed to feel no guilt afterwards. Tanjirou Komado was a riddle, and Urokodaki didn't know if he'd ever understand him. They had a more pressing problem anyway. Nezuko hadn't woken since her arrival at his home. Urokodaki knew enough to figure out she was still alive, but had no idea what happened to her. While his newest student showed no visible reaction, Urokodaki could tell it was bothering him too. By the beginning of the second week, Yoriichi was running with his sword in his hands. He'd been surprised how heavy the sword felt at first, thought that it might be his old feelings about not wanting to hurt people coming back. At the end of 2 hours, Yoriichi concluded it was just the weaker arms of his new body. Before, coming back from a running and doing thousands of sword swings would have been a refreshing break. But in this life it was hell. His arms ached and his shoulders burned with a sadistic vengeance. The good news was that he was definitely gaining in strength. The bad news ... he still had a very long way to go to reach his former strength again. Swords are fragile things, Urokodaki lectured. Yoriichi could admit he'd never thought of them that way. A sword in his hands had always felt terrifying, like one wrong move and it would come alive to eat someone. No ... wait ... he remembered holding a sword for the first time. His small, soft 7-year-old hands gripping the wooden hilt and feeling the smooth, delicate grain. The sword itself was thin and elegant, like a willow branch. Truthfully, that sword had been wooden. His father's vassal would never have given a 7-year-old a real sword to practice with, however scornful he'd been of any potential skill Yoriichi had. But all swords were the same in a way. A thin, delicate piece of steel relying on him to stay whole. At the end of that lesson, he'd slice through the bamboo target setup without a problem. His cut lacked the neatness of Urokodaki's and the swiftness, but still went all the way through. For his part, Urokodaki had to admit that few of his students managed to cut on the first try like that. Tanjiro had no reaction to Urokodaki's usual threats of bone breaking for sword mistreatment. But Urokodaki knew from that cut that Tanjiro knew enough to respect his swords. The next day, Yoriichi received an object lesson in just how much of his speed he had lost. He'd been instructed to try dodging Urokodaki while holding a sword. He'd managed to dodge Urokodaki's first 2 attempts, a hook kick and a punch to the gut respectively, but Urokodaki had simply sped for his third and Yoriichi found himself on the ground. Good. When you fall, you want to roll if at all possible. If you can't roll, though, cushioning yourself with your arms like that is perfect. If that hadn't been enough to clue Yoriichi into what the lesson was truly about, the next few lightning attacks followed by falls were enough too. He'd managed to get the hang of rolling with the momentum by the 3rd fall. By the 6th one, Yoriichi was beginning to guess Urokodaki was enjoying the lesson too much to stop simply because Yoriichi had learned quickly. If that was the way Urokodaki wanted to play it, then, as Yoriichi rolled next time, he grabbed a mud clod in the hand not gripping the sword. When he completed the roll and was facing Urokodaki again, he let the mud clod fly. It struck the center of the forehead on Urokodaki's mask and then rolled slowly down the mask and off, leaving a dirty trail behind it. Urokodaki stared at his student. Yoriichi's expression was the same as usual, blank and unconcerned. "I was practicing attacking, sir," Yoriichi said. "I want to see how quickly I come up from a fall into an attack." Silence. Yoriichi felt Urokodaki scrutinizing him, looking for any sign that Yoriichi was joking. "In future," Urokodaki said slowly, "you will only attack with your sword. Flinging mud or a rock will be useless against a demon." Yoriichi bowed his head and the lesson continued, albeit with Urokodaki watching Yoriichi's hands more carefully. The next day, Urokodaki began to explain total concentration breathing and water breathing forms. The breathing part was easy enough for Yoriichi. He'd been the one to invent it and so knew exactly how it worked and felt. All the same, he felt like the universe was laughing at him as he practiced the forms. "I can see in my head every single move I need to make. The way each move pulls on my muscles and bone is clear in my memories. But when I go to do them," Yoriichi thought. He swung the sword in the striking tide form and the blade wavered up-down when he'd meant to do a straight, clean slash. Urokodaki lectured him on the proper technique and Yoriichi felt an ugly spark of irritation on the inside. While his mind remembered everything, his new muscles did not have the reflexes or memories built in. Years of repetition and battle were all gone, leaving him swinging a sword like a novice. Truthfully, he was more of a prodigy. Urokodaki had never had a student or seen anyone even approach the speed at which Tanjiro was learning and growing in strength, stamina, and quickness. Not even Sabito came close. Yoriichi, however, could only compare himself to his older self and found himself lacking in every aspect. "Get in," Urokodaki ordered. Yoriichi glanced at the large waterfall and the drop to the pool where it emptied below, then faced Urokodaki with his usual expression. They stood there for 2 minutes, neither speaking. For his part, Urokodaki was starting to get the hang of finding other tells to show him what Tanjiro was feeling. Those 2 minutes were the Tanjiro equivalent of staring with raised eyebrows. "You need to become one with the water," Urokodaki said. More staring, this time with a slight head tilt. "Yes, I mean it. Now get in before I push you," he said. Without another word, Tanjiro pulled off his green and black checkered haori, then his shoes. He jumped down into the waterfall pool and then paddled over to the waterfall itself to stand underneath then meditate. Urokodaki watched with satisfaction as Tanjiro followed his orders. Good. The boy wasn't questioning him anymore. As he stood under the freezing cold water, though, Yoriichi was very much questioning his trainer. The first water breather hadn't used this technique when training apprentices, unless Rukia had grown sadistic after Yoriichi left the Corps. 500 years, it seemed, was enough to get sadism mixed in with the training. After that came more training runs on the mountain, this time with Urokodaki taking Yoriichi higher up and instructing him to use his sword to fend off traps rather than avoiding them. When he'd finished the 5th run blocking every blade and destroying every trap, Urokodaki brought him to the boulder. The rock was higher than Yoriichi and Urokodaki's heads. Its mass could have filled Urokodaki's house and then some. It was roughly round in shape with a tough rope hung with paper charms wrapped around it. "That's it. I have taught all I can. The rest is all up to you. You have to prove you are capable of advancing to the next level," Urokodaki said. He turned to face the boulder. "If you can cut this boulder in 2, I will allow you to enter the final selection." The words hit Yoriichi in the gut. Likely, he could have done it in his last life. Clear blue sky would have decimated the rock in an instant. Now, though, is it even possible for a newly trained demon slayer to do such a thing? Yoriichi wondered. Urokodaki had already turned around and started walking back in the direction they'd come. He didn't stay to give Yoriichi any instructions or tips. He was a hard teacher, but he'd never done that before. First the traps and then the waterfall, Yoriichi thought, and now this. Does he want me to fail? A jolt ran through Yoriichi and he realized that was exactly what Urokodaki wanted him to do. The traps hadn't been meant to kill. They'd been meant to scare him into quitting or maim him so that he couldn't become a demon slayer. The waterfall. It hadn't been about training or understanding water. Urokodaki had been trying to put him through something too brutal for him to handle so he'd stop trying to become a demon slayer. This boulder, this monstrosity of a rock was Urokodaki's final fail-safe. A catch-all measure that would prevent Yoriichi from getting to final selection until he grew frustrated then gave up. Why, though? Why would he try so hard to keep students from passing? Yoriichi wondered. It's unseemly to just stand there after being given an order, a harsh voice said. Yoriichi startled and looked up to the top of the boulder to see a boy with orange hair wearing a green kimono with yellow squares, a white jacket, and a fox mask with a scar on the left cheek. I didn't sense anyone coming. His presence feels faint, like a whisper, Yoriichi thought as he looked at the other boy. Who is he? The transparent world would show if he was a demon slayer or hallucination. Yoriichi focused on the boy and looked. No internal organs were visible, but he saw a faint silver shimmer around the boy. What? A demon slayer does not shrink from difficult tasks. Isn't that what you want to be? The boy continued. He pulled out a wooden practice sword. If you want to be a demon slayer, he dove down at Yoriichi's sword moving in a vertical slash then start acting like it. Yoriichi dodged to one side, but the boy simply slashed again, this time horizontally, forcing Yoriichi to duck. You are slow, Sabito said and he blurred into motion, hitting Yoriichi in the back with the practice blade to punctuate the words. Weak. A slower slash, though still too fast for Yoriichi to dodge. He just had time to block it, but the practice sword broke through his block with its sheer power. The sword hit him in the chest. You can't save yourself, let alone another human being. This time the sword swept up towards Yoriichi's neck and hovered a fraction of an inch from his throat. What do you think you're doing, trying to be a demon slayer? Yoriichi's face remained unchanged, but the words can't save and another human being struck him like a blow. The boy was right. Yoriichi had failed last time, failed to save anyone other than himself. Now he was weak and even that was taken away from him. I will be strong. I have to be, he said. The boy tilted his head. Why are you still sitting on your butt then? Take a fighting stance. Yoriichi blinked. The boy intended to fight him. But your sword isn't real, Yoriichi pointed out. You think you can hurt me, kid, because my sword is wood? The boy asked. He began to laugh. I appreciate your concern, but do you honestly think you'd be capable of giving me a scratch? That wasn't what Yoriichi had meant, but before he could clarify the boy was on him, beginning the fight once more. Yoriichi ducked under the first swing and then was forced to catch the second with his sword, locking blades with the boy. The boy pushed down on Yoriichi, taking advantage of his leverage. Rest assured, there is nothing to worry about. I am far more powerful than you will ever be. I've already cut through my boulder, the boy taunted. As he set his feet and pushed back against the boy, Yoriichi noted the part at the end about the boulder. It didn't make sense in light of the circumstances. There was no time to consider, though. The boy began to attack Yoriichi from above, bouncing off of trees and the boulder to come at him from all angles. Yoriichi caught onto his rhythm a few times and would begin to block all the strikes, but the boy would change it after a few of his hits were blocked, forcing Yoriichi to take hits and painful relearn the pattern. You haven't mastered any of training, the boy accused. Were you trained by Urokodaki at all? From his position on the ground, Yoriichi exploded upwards towards the boy. The boy's block was rougher that time. He'd barely gotten it into position in time. Any triumph Yoriichi felt was squashed as the boy increased the speed of his blows. At some point, the boy began to lecture him about drilling the moves into his muscles. The words stung him, but his implacable expression remained. By the time the sun was beginning to set, Yoriichi was battered, bruised, and so exhausted his legs shook. But he was still standing. The boy's expression was hidden behind his mask. But Yoriichi felt the anger in those eyes. No matter what I say, your face is like stone. You have no passion at all. Do you even want to become a demon slayer? The boy demanded. I have to, Yoriichi said softly. The words were the first he'd said in hours. I can't fail. Not a second time. The boy opened his mouth to speak. That was when Yoriichi moved. He leaped forward and up, aiming a hard strike at the boy's right shoulder. The boy blocked him and Yoriichi landed on the other side on his stomach. Spinning to face his enemy, the boy found Yoriichi lying on the ground, eyes shut and unmoving. He put everything he had into that last strike, the boy theorized. How desperate. Then he felt a small prickle of cold air on his right shoulder. The boy glanced at it and saw a tiny hole in the fabric. Yoriichi hadn't managed to land a proper strike. He had scratched the boy, though. Maybe this one has potential after all, the boy murmured. He turned around to look at a small girl in a flower kimono with a fox mask, also marked with flowers. I'll leave the rest to you, he told her. She nodded and he vanished. When Yoriichi opened his eyes, the sky was dark and the stars were twinkling beside a silver half-moon. He could feel another oddly faint presence, like the boys, beside him. "Are you all right?" a soft voice asked. Yoriichi sat up and turned to face the voice's owner. The little girl crouching next to him reminded him painfully of Yuta, with her black hair and kind eyes. Yuta, however, was never as delicate as this girl or as graceful, though Yoriichi loved his wife the better for lacking those qualities. His wife was real, warm and comforting, while this girl reminded him of the stories of fairies some of the Westerners told at ports. She gave him a questioning look at Yoriichi, realized he hadn't said anything yet. "I am fine," he said. Then he focused on her in the transparent world, confirming his suspicions. She was just like the boy from earlier, all right. The girl gave him a doubtful look. "The hit I took was pretty bad," Yoriichi admitted. "But I need to move past it so I can get stronger. Strong enough to protect myself and her." The girl smiled. She didn't ask who Yoriichi was talking about. "I am positive you can do it, because I'll be there to look after you." Warmth flickered to life in Yoriichi's chest. Her simple words stole a little bit of the coldness there away. "If you are going to look after me, I need to know your name," Yoriichi said. The girl explained to him that her name was Makumo and even revealed the name of the boy from earlier, Sabito. She then asked to see Yoriichi's stances and began to help him correct them. She didn't reveal much during the training, but she did say Sabito and we both love Urokodaki very much. The look in her eyes was always wistful when she said those words. Then she spoke about how she and Sabito and many others had been orphans, raised by Urokodaki. That made Urokodaki's gruff fatherly manner make sense to Yoriichi. The mention of others troubled him, though, and he would occasionally scan the perimeter using the transparent world. When she caught Yoriichi looking around, she said, "Don't worry, Tanjiro. They are not watching from anywhere close by." A routine developed. Makumo would instruct Yoriichi during the morning, with a gentle and soothing hand. During late afternoon, Sabito would attack and spar with Yoriichi until he knocked Yoriichi out. A month later, Sabito showed up with a real sword in his hand. "It took you a month, but you look like you finally belong," Sabito said. Yoriichi, as usual, did not reply to Sabito's smack talk. Sabito usually peppered his attacks with taunts and insults, possibly to get Yoriichi angry enough to make a mistake. In the end, Sabito was the one who got angry, though, over Yoriichi's lack of reaction. Makumo watched as Yoriichi and Sabito faced each other, her expression unreadable. Unlike their previous encounters, Sabito did not charge in immediately. He gave Yoriichi the wariness due to a true opponent. Both swordsmen stood still, weapons drawn, waiting for an opening. When they moved, both became blurs. Sabito went for an overhand chop, but before he could land it, Yoriichi swung his own downward chop. The blade moved in the instant between when Sabito started his move and when he would have begun to swing the blade down. The slash landed, cutting through the center of Sabito's mask. The mask fell around Sabito's face in two halves, revealing startled blue eyes, ginger hair, and a scar the exact same color and shape as the one on his mask. The halves dangled from the strap behind his head like oversized earrings. Sabito stared for a moment and then smiled. Happiness, relief, and sadness were all encapsulated in that smile. He stepped aside to reveal the boulder, now cut into two halves like the mask. "You did just great," Makumo said. She too smiled, the same emotions in hers as had been in the boys. "Win for me again, Tanjiro." The next one too. She started to fade and Yoriichi had a feeling that Sabito was doing the same on the other side. "I already know," Yoriichi said. Makumo stopped for a second and frowned. "Know what?" Yoriichi leveled a flat stare at her and looked at an equally frozen Sabito. "I know that you are both apprentices of Urokodaki who died during the final selection. Both of you are ghosts." Sabito crossed his arms. "I don't know what you mean. If you think I'm not real, we may need to go another round or two." "You have no," Yoriichi almost said presence or body, then quickly rethought. "Scent. Urokodaki's training methods are great, but mixed in with them are a few traps designed to prevent people from passing. The bladed traps, the waterfall, and the boulder. He doesn't want students to go to final selection." "Don't you dare," Sabito said. "Don't you dare insult." "Calm down," Makumo said, raising a small hand. "Hear him out. As I said, Urokodaki's training methods are fine," Yoriichi continued. "But he doesn't want students going to final selection. He'd rather they give up or be forced to do so." I wondered why that was. "You two are the answer. The students he has been sending are dying in final selection some reason. It wasn't just you either. Makumo mentioned there are lots of you. That means you two are ghosts and died in final selection." Silence reigned after Yoriichi's final statement. Sabito and Makumo looked at each for a moment, then reached an agreement. "You are right," Makumo admitted. "We are ghosts and we did die during final selection. I don't see how that matters, though, Sabito interjected. It matters because your presence proves that your deaths weren't the result of demon slayers who weren't ready, Yoriichi said. I've seen both of your skills levels and I know that you would be more than enough to pass any test. How would you know that? Sabito asked archly. Yoriichi's calm mask saved him. Internally, he was cursing himself for nearly giving everything away. I have seen quite a few demon slayers, Yoriichi said, hoping that would be enough. Apparently it was, because neither of the two ghosts questioned it. That means something happened during the test, something unexpected, and it keeps happening to Urokodaki's students in particular. I am going to take that test, so I need to know. Sabito shook his head. You don't. It won't do you any good. Sabito, Makumo exclaimed. The two looked at each other again, but this time they didn't come to any agreement. Makumo pulled her gaze sharply away and stepped forward. It's a demon, she said. Makumo, Sabito protested. Makumo's hand formed into tiny fists, and she glared at Sabito. He has a right to know, Makumo said. He's also the first student we've seen who might have a chance of beating that monster. He'd be better off avoiding it, Sabito scoffed. If he tries it, he'll die like the others. At this point, that would probably be true, Yoriichi admitted. Both the ghosts turned to look at him sharply, surprised. But I can do it if you give me more training, Yoriichi said. From what Urokodaki said, the next exam will be in 2 more months. We can take that time to help me build up strength and sharpen my skills. We can also strategize. You two have faced this demon before. If you tell me all about him, I can be prepared for any surprises he might have. Makumo stepped forward and held out a hand. I accept. Yoriichi took her hand and Makumo looked pointedly at Sabito, holding out her other hand to him. The boy stood there, for a moment, indecision written on his features. Then he took Yoriichi's other hand and Makumo's. They stood for a moment, in an odd triangle, and then broke up and bowed to each other. Show Urokodaki the boulder, then eat and sleep. Be back here at dawn, Sabito instructed. Then he and Makumo both disappeared. When Yoriichi brought Urokodaki to show him, the old man stood for a moment, regarding the boulder. Yoriichi wondered what was going through Urokodaki's head. Would he be upset? Urokodaki simply turned around and spoke. To be honest, I never had any intention of sending you to the final selection because I didn't want any more children to die, he said. I was sure you would never be able to cut through this boulder. Yoriichi was surprised to hear Urokodaki say that out loud. He'd thought that the trainer would pretend it had been his intention all along to send him. The old man reached out a hand and ruffled the top of Yoriichi's hair. Well done, Tanjiro. Truly remarkable. I am very proud. He then did something he never had before. He hugged Tanjiro close to him. Make sure you make it back from final selection alive. Your sister and I will be waiting for you, Urokodaki said. Yoriichi looked out over Urokodaki's shoulder at the misty landscape. I promise, I will return, Yoriichi said, both to his trainer and the 2 waiting ghosts. For the next few months, Sabito showed Yoriichi no mercy. His lunges were faster, slashes more powerful, and jumps more unpredictable. If anything, Yoriichi was beginning to suspect that Sabito had been holding back in their previous training. I didn't want you to get too discouraged, Sabito said when Yoriichi confronted him about it. You needed to get enough strength to destroy the boulder and reach final selection. Makumo and I had hoped that enough power and speed would help you escape the demon if you met him. You keep mentioning him, Yoriichi pointed. But you haven't told me anything yet. The answer to that question had been a fast, hard strike to the temple that laid Yoriichi out until his morning session with Makumo. Credit where it was due, Yoriichi had never seen anyone use the immune part of a katana so skillfully. Makumo was just as intense as Sabito, but in her own way. She became more critical of Yoriichi's movements, correcting his body position, and control of the blade more often. The girl also added in breathing drills. She'd have him do various tasks like weaving a flower crown that required concentration and keep concentration breathing up the whole time. She also did not talk about the demon at first. One day, Yoriichi made 2 flower crowns at Makumo's request. He handed her one and the girl looked at him, puzzled. Carefully, Yoriichi set the other on his own head, threading his ponytail through it. The back of his ponytail stood up oddly and the color of the flowers clashed with his hair and kimono. With a straight face he said, "Now we match." Makumo began to giggle. She covered in her mouth then turned away, trying to regain her composed teacher mask. After a moment, she turned around again, face straight, and then saw Yoriichi and burst into laughter again. Her laughter was sweet, musical even, like tinkling silver bells. It warmed Yoriichi's heart. "You don't like it?" he asked, pretending to be confused. "It looks very unique," Makumo said, and then broke into a fresh round of giggles. Without warning, the merriment suddenly shut off, and when she turned back to Yoriichi, she looked sad again. "It's just like it used to be back then," Makumo said. Back when it was him, me, and Sabito. Who? Yoriichi asked, intrigued by the sudden mention of this third person. Another apprentice of Urokodaki's. The demons killed his family so he was an orphan like us, Makumo explained. He went to final selection with Sabito. I followed the year after. Yoriichi didn't ask what happened to him, but Makumo seemed to sense the question. He didn't die in final selection, she said, surprising Yoriichi. But a large part of him did. I think he still wishes he'd died sometimes. You never visit him? Yoriichi asked. Makumo shook her head. Sabito and I are tied to the mountain because it was a major part of both our life and our death. Our desire to stay in this world comes from here. So when the demon dies, you will fade? Yoriichi asked. He hoped not. She and Sabito were the first friends he'd made in this life. Well, made as himself anyway and not blissfully unaware Tanjiro Komado. We will face a choice then, Makumo said. If we want, we can move on to the next life, but if our desires lay elsewhere, we might move there instead. I'm not sure we can connect to a person, though. Yoriichi nodded. It had probably been too much to hope that Makumo and Sabito would be able to keep him company. He didn't deserve such comfort during his penance anyway. I think I can tell you now, Makumo said suddenly, about the demon and my death. The sun was shining brightly overhead and the sky was a pale, cloudless blue, but Yoriichi felt like a chill wind was blowing through when she said that. I entered the forest on the mountain top, the one with a ring of wisteria around it. It seemed easy at first. The training had made me so strong and so fast that I ran into him. Yoriichi had never heard venom in Makumo's voice. The girl almost hadn't seemed capable of anger, but now he heard it. The demon is larger than most, a great giant with multiple arms and red-tipped claws. The aura he exudes is stronger than any demon I've ever met. I don't think he was just eating humans. He must have been eating demons as well to steal their power, Makumo said. I can't tell you much about his strengths and weaknesses. Sabito was always better with those and I didn't fit him with a clear head. That was my mistake, you see. He told me about them, about Sabito and all the others he'd killed. The descriptions he gave of their deaths. Makumo began to tremble. At first, Yoriichi thought she was crying, then he noticed the look in her eyes. It was anger, not fear, that made her shake. I couldn't stand it. To see him standing there, gloating about their deaths and how each one had tasted. How their screams had been music to his ears. Right then I decided to make him pay. Make him pay. She all but shouted the last 3 words. I lost my head completely. I was so focused on my own feelings and the need for revenge that I lost control of my breathing. He caught me soon after that and tore me into pieces. The last words he said to me before I died were that my death was Sakonji's fault, and that he hoped the old man would kill himself once enough of his children had died. When she met Yoriichi's eyes, he could see they were bright with tears of rage and grief. I never believed what he said about Sakonji. The thought of what I had done, though, of the pain my death was going to cause him. It was too much, Makumo said. I found Sabito on the other side and together we made our way here. Yoriichi was silent. It wasn't your fault, Yoriichi said. You were never supposed to face one that's strong. But I got so angry. I wanted to kill that demon even if I died as well. I let myself lose control, Makumo protested. Gently, Yoriichi wrapped his arms around her. He didn't know until he felt the cloth of her kimono and her delicate skin if he would go right through her or not. For a moment, he held her in a hug. You loved Sabito and Sakonji, Yoriichi said. That love was not a weakness. No one should have to go through what you did. Not even a demon slayer. Makumo stiffened in his arms and then pressed against him for a moment. She shook with silent sobs and they sat there for a moment, not speaking. When they finally pulled apart, Yoriichi thought about trying for a smile. It had come so easy when he was Tanjiro Komado. Now, though, it was like his muscles had forgotten how again. He had a feeling that if he tried, he'd wind up looking creepy like his twin brother had always said he did. So he maintained his usual serene calm. I think we've had enough of a break, Makumo said. Time to get back to work. We'll do 100 repetitions of water wheel. Your wrist was a little stiff last time we tried it. Without a word, Yoriichi stood up and grabbed his sword. He followed Makumo further into the clearing by the split boulder. Make sure you keep your wrist flexible as you swing and spot where you are going to land, Makumo said. Yoriichi nodded and started to crouch. And Tanjiro, he looked over at her, waiting. Thank you, she said, and this time her smile was genuine. No sadness lurking behind it to cast a shadow. Sabito finally broke his silence about final selection and the demon on a moonlit night when Yoriichi had landed a particular fast blow to his shoulder. It was the 3rd time in a row Yoriichi had won through what Sabito had termed a hypothetical death blow. Because if you can hit my shoulder close to my neck, you'd be able to lop the head off if I were a demon, Sabito had told him. But that gives me only a small target, Yoriichi pointed out. And now I will be aiming for the neck. It won't be any different with the demons, Sabito stated, and Yoriichi had to admit that the ghost boy was right, as extensive experience in his previous life confirmed. He'd had one demon who'd been able to grow some kind of rock crystal to protect his neck from blades. In the end, Hinakami Kagura had melted through the rock like it wasn't there, but it had required a direct, full-force hit to manage it. Sabito grunted after Yoriichi won the third round. You're good, Sabito admitted grudgingly. Better than you should be at this point. The words surprised Yoriichi, partly because Sabito was a miser about compliments, but also because he felt he hadn't progressed much in his skill, speed, and power at all. I'm still not better than you, though, Yoriichi said. A snort from Sabito. You have been here what? Almost a year. I trained with Urokodaki for 5 years before taking the final test. I'd been training from age 7, which was the age I was when I met Urokodaki. They won't let you take on final selection until you're at least 12. Urokodaki wouldn't let me go before then anyway. Yoriichi was unsure of how to respond, so he simply looked at Sabito and waited for the other boy to return to fighting stance for another round of sparring. Instead, Sabito sheathed his sword and leaned against the boulder. Now is as good a time as any, I guess. Only a few more weeks left and then you face final selection. You need to know what you will be facing. The description of final selection Sabito gave matched Makumo's, but also added in a few more details, like the test being 7 days and the usual level of demon encountered. They were weak, Sabito said dismissively, made so by the wisteria flowers and the lack of humans to eat on the mountain. Some eat a few unprepared candidates during final selection, but there are never enough humans to feed all of them. They are starving and some of them are all but emaciated. A demon without food is barely stronger than the average human. To Yoriichi, it sounded cruel to keep the demons in such a state. He also couldn't help but wonder about Nezuko. She'd never eaten a human and he'd never allow her to. Would that make her weak and sick? Was it why she was in a coma? Hey, Sabito demanded. Are you listening? I can't tell with that face of yours. Yoriichi blinked, refocused, and then nodded. So I encountered the hand demon on my last night in the forest, after killing several of the weaker ones. Mostly to bail the idiots who weren't ready out of danger, Sabito continued. He has an enormous mouth and so many arms that uses them to walk instead of his legs and wears no clothing. Those arms are his suit of armor. 6 of them are dedicated just to shielding his neck by wrapping around it, with another 4 sprouting close to the neck to act as extra defense. Over the years, he has become an expert at using them all in tandem. The good news is that while his arms move quickly, his bulk is too big to travel across the ground very fast. If you need a moment to adjust yourself, you can leave his range for a bit, and then dart in again later. Listening intently, Yoriichi burned Sabito's words into his brain. In his previous life, he'd sometimes get information on a demon, though rarely. The previous master of the Demon Slayer Corps had usually sent him after demons other senior slayers couldn't handle. More often, he'd encounter one while traveling to find a specific one or be sent to a spot where slayers were disappearing and no survivors had emerged to give information about the monster. I managed to hold the demon off for a while, Sabito said. Long enough for everyone but me to run away from it and live. I had help at first, another apprentice of Urokodaki, but he took a bad blow from the demon and I had to ask 2 of the others to take him with them. I could have run too, however, I decided to try and kill him on my own. Sabito smiled ruefully. I was proud, confident in my skills after all the training and how easy the other demons had gone down. In the end, I landed a glancing slash to one of the arms protecting his neck, then he swatted me to the ground and I broke my leg. I was too close to him to run away, so I still tried to fight. With my broken leg, I wasn't fast enough. He caught me with 2 of his hands, squeezed hard enough to break my arms and ribs then and said he'd swallow me whole, so I could feel the pain as I was digested. Just before he did it, he told me that I must have been Urokodaki's pride and joy, that the old man would feel devastated when he realized that he'd doomed me to die. While Sabito's voice remained flat and dispassionate as he said those words, Yoriichi could see the hurt in his eyes, the regret. Like Makumo, Sabito thought that his death was his own fault. He wouldn't say it, though, not out loud. You did a brave thing, saving your friend and those other slayers, Yoriichi noted. That should have been enough, Sabito snapped. I shouldn't have stayed behind to fight, I should have run. Maybe, Yoriichi said. Why didn't you? Because I thought I could beat it, Sabito said, his fist clenched. I don't think so, Yoriichi replied. The ghost boy scoffed. How would you know? We've known each other for less than 3 months. Because of what you said about saving the other slayers. You didn't do that to up your own ego or show how tough you were. You did that because you wanted them to live, Yoriichi pointed out. So, what if I did? That's different, Sabito growled. Is it? I don't think it is. You took on that demon because you didn't want it to kill Makumo when she came or anyone else taking final selection. Running from that demon would have meant that I lived on to kill and kill until someone finally took it down. Who knew how many lives would be lost in the meantime? That's why you are still here, trying to prepare others. You want to protect just as you did in the forest. Sabito's eyes widened and he stared at Yoriichi. Yoriichi met his gaze, eyes still blank and serene. You know, you are one weird kid, he said. Yoriichi didn't reply. Sabito leaned his back against the boulder and looked up at the stars. It was a new moon that night and the stars seemed to shine all the brighter for the lack of the moon's light. I am not saying you're right, Sabito said finally, but I will think about what you said. Standing upright, he slid into a stance. We have time for one more round before Urokodaki gets worried and comes looking for you. You need your sleep anyway. Don't think I'll go easy on because you said some sappy words either. I wouldn't expect that, Yoriichi said. He went into his own fighting stance and prepared to attack. Yoriichi lost the resulting spar and ended up with bruises to remember along with questions about how a ghost could hit so hard. On the night before final selection, Urokodaki prepared a hot pot for dinner with grilled fish, wild greens and mushrooms from the mountain, small chunks of chicken, and rice. In his previous life, Yoriichi had never had to forage for himself, but had done so plenty of times as Tanjiro Komado. It was one of the skills learned when a family had many mouths to feed and only a modest income to use. So as he gazed on the hot pot, Yoriichi knew how long it must have taken Urokodaki to get all of this together. Hours fishing in the stream, more time ranging the mountain for the vegetables and mushrooms, possible trading in the village for the rice and chicken. All of it added up. When Urokodaki told him that they were celebrating the end of Yoriichi's training and to eat as much as he wanted, Yoriichi felt his heart swell slightly like a sail in the wind. Memories from his past life danced in his head, happy ones for once. The astonished look on Yuta's face as she came home to find him tending an iron pot of her favorite stew. The feeling of surprise and pleasure on his wife unwrapped a piece of mochi she'd made him for his birthday. In each case, someone had spent time doing something just for him. It made him feel special, wanted. So as he took the bowl Urokodaki handed him with a word of thanks and tucked in, Urokodaki thought he saw the edge of a smile in Tanjiro's face, though the boy remained otherwise impassive. Urokodaki felt a smile of his own, creeping onto his face beneath the mask. He'd wondered if it was possible for Tanjiro Komado to smile, and now he knew for sure that somewhere inside this confusing, unreadable boy there was happiness to be found. Yoriichi felt it when Urokodaki's aura changed. After the meal, when Yoriichi was seeing to his belongings, making sure everything he needed for the next day was ready to go, Urokodaki's presence grew sober, almost sad. He thinks this is the last night he'll see me alive, Yoriichi thought. That I might be dead by tomorrow night. Not for the first time, Yoriichi wondered if Urokodaki knew about the demon targeting his apprentices. He'd asked Makumo and Sabito, but both of them admitted they weren't sure. If he'd known, surely he would have warned the apprentices, yet he put these impossible tests in the way of apprentices, so maybe he knew something was wrong. Hey Tanjiro, Urokodaki said suddenly. What did you think of the hot pot? It was good, Yoriichi said. It was the truth and you were supposed to say those kinds of things, right? Should he have been more effusive? Sometimes, Yoriichi thought demons were easier to deal with than people. They never expected you to understand them without explanation. A growing boy with an appetite like yours will get bigger and stronger the bigger his meals are, Urokodaki continued. Something inside, Yoriichi slumped in relief at passing the unseen test. The same applies to demons, Urokodaki said. Remember that. The more humans a demon has eaten, the more powerful they'll be. He knows, Yoriichi realized as Urokodaki got up and reached for something in a cupboard. He knows about the demon and how it has gotten so strong. But why? Why not say something directly instead of a vague hint? Urokodaki gazed somberly down at the white Tengu mask. How many other times had he done this exact thing? Given the strongest protection he could offer only to see his children die anyway. All he could do was hope and pray that this time would be different. That this time, one would come home to him. They get stronger, Urokodaki said. Physical traits change and some learn to use strange spells. You'll be able to tell how many souls they have claimed once your sense of smell is more developed. Yoriichi thought about the transparent world. It helped him pick out unusual features and stronger demons, sure, but the presence sensing aspect of it was of more use, and having to strain to feel the leftovers bits of Urokodaki's presence on the traps had helped to refine it. It was a good point, though, that just because he was at the end of his training, Yoriichi shouldn't give up working on it. Urokodaki turned and presented the mask to Yoriichi. It had the same perpetual blank expression as Yoriichi with wide, unreadable eyes and a frown extending to painted-on cheeks. In the top right corner of the mask was a red sun. Secretly, Yoriichi found it ironic that he should be marked with a sun. "What is this?" Yoriichi asked, taking it. "It's called a warding mask," Urokodaki explained. "It has been enchanted by a protection spell to keep you from harm." "Now makes sense," Yoriichi said to himself, thinking about Sabito and Makumo's masks. Urokodaki must have made them as protection as well. It hadn't saved them, sadly, and Yoriichi knew it would not be enough to help him either. "I can think of this mask as a promise to Urokodaki," Yoriichi thought. "A promise that I will come home unbroken and safe." The following morning, Yoriichi dressed in a kimono patterned after Urokodaki's. He slipped out to visit the memorial stone with a quick excuse of wanting to take one last walk on the mountain. "What are you doing here?" Sabito demanded once Yoriichi entered the clearing. "You should be with Urokodaki and your sister." "Nice to see you too," Yoriichi said flatly, eyebrow raised. "I see he gave you your mask," Makumo said. "It's beautiful." "Thank you," Yoriichi said, giving her a slight bow. "Hey," Sabito said. "Don't ignore me." "I wanted to say goodbye," Yoriichi said. "When the demon dies, you'll move on so I'll never get to see you again." "If you kill him," Sabito muttered, though there was worry hidden behind his contempt. "I wanted to thank you both. You have been there for me throughout my training, have encouraged and pushed me to be more." "Where is all this sappy stuff coming from?" Sabito said, genuinely surprised. "Where'd the guy who says barely anything get to?" "I'm not usually the best at talking," Yoriichi admitted. "I have one more thing to say to both of you, though it is more of a promise." Taking a deep breath, Yoriichi looked at both of them, allowing confidence and power to flow through him. In that moment, he wasn't just Tanjirou Komado, demon slayer in training. He was the strong, seasoned warrior he'd been in his last life, and he spoke as he would have to the Hashira he'd served alongside. "I will defeat that demon and end his killing spree once for all." Makumo's eyes grew wide. Even Sabito looked at Yoriichi in awe. Neither were prepared for this side of Yoriichi, for the sudden rise of his confidence. They found themselves believing in that moment that anything was possible, even if Yoriichi declared he would sprout wings and fly. Yoriichi bowed to them both and then turned to go. As he walked away, he heard Makumo whisper, like she had that night, "Win for me, Tanjiro. I'd better not see you come crying back on your knees after a speech like that." Sabito yelled. His words were abrasive, but his tone had compassion in it. Yoriichi waved and then returned back down the path through the trees to Urokodaki's house. The next person he said goodbye to, because he still thought of her as a person even if she was a demon, was Nezuko. Throughout the entire stay at Urokodaki's house, she had remained asleep on the futon in the small room. Occasional glances through the transparent assured Yoriichi there was no issue with her brain or vital organs. But what if there was an issue he couldn't see? Reaching out a hand, Yoriichi touched her forehead lightly to feel her temperature. As always, it was cold and unmarked by fever. "Nezuko, I promise I'll come back for you," Yoriichi said quietly. The demon girl didn't respond. Yoriichi liked to think that she would have wished him good luck if she'd been awake and able to speak. He slid the door shut and grabbed his pack. Urokodaki leaned against the wall of the house outside, waiting close to the door. "No need to worry about your sister. I'll take care of her for you," Urokodaki said. His tone was steady and normal with a clear subtext. "If you don't return, I will take responsibility for her." The offer eased Yoriichi's stress somewhat because he knew that Nezuko would be safe, even if he failed. "Thanks for everything," Yoriichi said. He turned towards the road, began to walk down it, and then hesitated. "I'm off. See you later," Yoriichi said. Slowly, Urokodaki raised a hand and waved at it. His presence was bursting with sadness and melancholy. He didn't dare to hope that Tanjiro would return, not when so many others before him hadn't. Yoriichi headed down the road again, careful to keep a fast and not too taxing pace. There would be a fight at the end of his journey, after all. As Yoriichi climbed the stone steps to the gathering place for final selection on top of the mountain, he marveled at the sheer amount of wisteria flowers. The purple flower hung down from the trees in waves like luminous growing hair. The clean, sharp smell of the blossoms assaulted his nose and he rubbed at it. He'd been lying about the super nose, sure, but it didn't take one to be bothered by this strong of a scent. The gathering place turned out to be a stone walkway with 6 red pillars lining it. Strings ran from each pillar to the trees or the one next to it, supporting paper banners. 2 large rock outcroppings poked out of the ground from either side. Yoriichi looked at the other slayers, curious to see what kind of children the new generation of demon slayers had attracted. Quite a few of them were dressed in dark colors, probably to blend in with the background more at night. It was a foolish decision. Demon eyesight at night was too sharp for such tactics to be worth it. A few of them had scars and most moved like the samurai Yoriichi knew from his past life. While his expression didn't change, Yoriichi felt shocked as he looked at them. Out of all the candidates, only 2 of them, a boy with yellow hair in a yellow kimono and a black-haired girl in a pink kimono, showed signs of knowing how to use breathing techniques. The other candidates moved like trained warriors, sure, but they also moved wrong. All wrong for breathing techniques. This is going to be a slaughter, Yoriichi thought, dismayed. Good evening. Tonight, you've come to enter the Demon Slayer Corps' final selection. Thank you all for being here, 2 young voice chorused. Yoriichi's eyes turned to the front of the path where 2 children in matching kimonos with strands of wisteria. One child had white hair while others was black as night. The one with the black hair froze Yoriichi in his tracks. It's the master was his first thought. But it couldn't be. The one he served would be long dead even without the curse that ate away his body. So the boy, for it was a boy even if he was dressed like a girl, had to be a child of the current head of the Yubeashiki clan, the current master of the Demon Corps. Here on Mount Fujikasen, there are several demons who were captured alive by demon slayers. They are kept here for this event, said the white-haired girl. The wisteria blossoms prevent them from leaving, the black-haired boy explained. They bloom on this mountain year-round. They cover everything from the base to halfway to the top. The wisteria ends here, the white-haired girl explained. Demons abound from this point on and they are very hungry. In order to pass the test and enter the Demon Slayer Corps, you must last 7 days beyond the wisteria's protection, the black-haired boy said. Now your trial begins, the 2 children said together. They bowed and stepped aside to allow the candidates to move forward and pass the final ring of wisteria flowers. Several candidates raced past the marker, swords already drawn. The girl in the pink kimono followed them at a more sedate pace, and the boy in yellow swallowed nervously before inching his way down the path. Excuse me, Yoriichi said, turning to one of the children. What happens if someone gets injured too badly to continue? Usually, they die, the white-haired girl answered, her voice flat. And if they manage to make it back to the wisteria, they fail final selection, the boy replied. But you'd give them medical attention, right? You'd let them live, Yoriichi pressed. The children look at each other for a moment, uncertain looks on their faces, and then they nodded. Thank you, Yoriichi said, bowing, and then he took off into the forest. The first few demons he met while running through the forest attacked him. One leaped at him from the air with a shout. He easily sidestepped it, slashing through its neck as he went. The demon's body hit the ground and started to disintegrate almost immediately. Another 2, one with long hairy arms and legs, and another with long hair and horns, leaped at him and then started to fight over who had saw Yoriichi first and got to eat him. Yoriichi solved the argument by slicing of both their heads before they had a chance to turn on him. After a 4th demon charged at him and received a slice to the torso followed by decapitation. The demons started to be more wary of attacking him. Yoriichi was grateful for that because he'd found the first of the other candidates. The boy was sitting on the ground, his legs pierced by several bony-looking spines. A demon covered from head to toe in the spines was reaching out to pull him, mouth open wide. Yoriichi charged him from behind and took off his head easily. He assessed the boy's condition. The legs would be useless and his eyes were wide and glassy. Final selection was over for him, regardless. Hoisting him over his shoulder, Yoriichi ran back in the direction of the ring of wisteria. On the way, he had to set the boy down twice to help another boy and a girl. They were injured as well, but they could at least follow him on their own shaky legs. He handed the boy with the spines his legs to the girl and watched as the 3 enter the ring of wisteria and safety. The rest of the first night went much the same. Yoriichi rescued candidates in trouble and helped them get back to safety. Some were glad of his presence, babbling gratitude in his ears so much that demons almost snuck up on him. Others were too much in shock to speak. The final group glared at him as he shepherded them to safety, like his being uninjured was a personal insult to them. When the first day dawned, Yoriichi was weary and more than ready to go to sleep. He allowed himself to sleep most of the morning and then spent the afternoon foraging for food and water to keep his strength up. The second night promised to be much the same as the first when it began. More candidates in trouble and more demons attacking them. A few of the demons banded together at one point and tried to eat the group he was taking to safety. Yoriichi dispatched them all, but one of them managed to scratch his arm with its claws. It was a jarring reminder that he was not invincible. A boy ran past Yoriichi shouting about not having signed up for this. Yoriichi crouched, preparing to attempt yet another rescue, and then the lumbering shape of the demon came into view. His gaze sharpened as he realized what he was looking at. I found him, Yoriichi thought. Nakumo, Sabito, I found him. His grip tightened on his sword and he took a deep breath, then shot after the huge, green bulk of the hand demon. The boy running from the demon tripped over a tree root and fell. He gripped his sword tightly in one hand, looking fearfully over his shoulder at the approaching demon. The demon lifted one of his many arms and Yoriichi noted another boy, this one dead, hanging from his grip. As Yoriichi and the terrified boy watched, the demon lifted the other candidate's corpse, opened his mouth, and swallowed in a single gulp. The boy shouted in panic and tried to escape again. The demon's arms bulged and shot out in two long tendrils. The tendrils moved fast, snatching up the boy by the ankle in a fraction of a second. He's fast, Yoriichi thought. Sabito wasn't exaggerating about that. When the hand demon opened his mouth to swallow the struggling boy in his grip, Yoriichi made his move. He charged over the last few feet of trees, bounced off one at the edge of the clearing around the monster, and leaped at him. His sword flashed out in the water wheel technique. The blade cut through several of the demon arms, but the strike was too low. Too late. Yoriichi realized he'd missed the neck by inches. As he flashed by, Yoriichi managed to flick the blade up in another strike, this time cutting the boy in the demon's hand free. Yoriichi landed on the other side of the clearing and stood with his blade ready. Rude. You went straight for the neck without even talking, the hand demon complained. He scanned Yoriichi and grinned when he spotted the fox mask on his head. Well, would you look at that? It's another one of those sweet little foxes. Run away. Yoriichi thought at the other boy, but he stayed where he was lying on the ground and staring up the demon. Say, fox cub, are we still in Meiji? The hand demon asked. Yoriichi began to circle the demon, looking for the best angle to approach him from. The words registered distantly. Meiji. The demon was indeed old. No wonder it had grown powerful. Not very talkative, are you? The hand demon sneered. Is Urokodaki so desperate he's training mutes now? In reply, Yoriichi leaped at the demon once more, this time trying for a rising tide strike in one of the less protected areas. If he could force the demon to take some of his arms off his neck, so much the better. Nice try. I have to admit, you may be the most skilled of his students. After the boy with the pink hair and the scar, they started going downhill. I have killed 13 of them, but they were so forgettable that only remember 2. The boy with the pink hair and a girl who wore a flowery kimono. Small, not much power, but awfully agile. Sabito and Makumo, Yoriichi thought. I can always recognize one his brats by those masks he wears. They are same texture as his Tengu mask, easy to spot. He calls them warding masks, but they don't ward of anything. In fact, that's how I know what children to eat. They are all inside my belly. It's as if he's sending them to their deaths. When I told the little girl that, she started crying. It wasn't long before she lost all control of her movement. I ripped her limb from limb and feasted, the hand demon boasted. He began to laugh. The image of Makumo and the rage on her face filled Yoriichi's thoughts. He felt the hot tears that coursed into his kimono. Her warning not to get angry fell on deaf ears. Yoriichi attacked again and the demon was ready. Several tendrils composed of hands shot out to grab Yoriichi, but he sliced off them all and stabbed his sword into the mouth area. The hand demon hissed. Anger should have made the brat's breathing shaky. It hadn't. The brat jumped back off the demon and stood before him. His eyes were terrifying blank and the air around him seemed to spark with power and fury. What's so amusing about this? Yoriichi said, his voice low and dangerous. It seems a human life is worth nothing to you. When Yoriichi attacked again, he stared at the demon through the unforgiving light of the transparent world. He ran at the hand demon like an avenging angel, chopping through hand after hand as if they had been sticks. When bones suddenly appeared underground, Yoriichi jumped and dodged the hands that burst from the earth to grab him. The demon tried to catch him by the head in midair, but Yoriichi cleaved through the hand and ran up the arm towards the neck. He drew back his sword and focused all his strength and speed, from breathing and his own muscles, into one powerful water-style slash. The blade sheared through the demon's neck and the head fell, eyes wide with surprise. Nakumo, Sabito, I have done it. You should be free now. I hope wherever you go next, you are happy. Yoriichi watched as the demon crumbled, his eyes wide with panic and tears. In spite of everything, Yoriichi hoped the demon was better off wherever he was going, and that he would be the person he'd once been instead of the monster Kibutsuji turned him into. What are you? Asked a broken voice. Right? He'd forgotten the boy on the ground for a moment. I'll be taking you back to the gate now, Yoriichi said after turning around. With a wound like that, you can't fight. Your time in final selection is over. The boy's eyes widened and, for a moment, Yoriichi thought he would argue. It'd be a pity if he did. Yoriichi'd have to knock him out if he struggled. If you think, he said, for even a moment that I want to have to fight something like that thing again, you are insane. Yoriichi frowned. Does that mean you're okay with going back? Oh, yes. Get me out of this blasted forest, the boy said. Yoriichi carefully picked him up and slung him over one shoulder, then started making his way to the entrance once more. He hoped the demons would leave him alone for the rest of tonight. He hadn't fought so hard in a while, and his limbs felt leaden with exhaustion. The third night was a trying one for Yoriichi. He had fewer people in trouble to rescue, but the remaining demons were getting desperate enough to mob the sparse remaining candidates. None of his fights that night were one-on-one or even one-on-two. There were at least 3 for every person he rescued, and several came after him out of desperation. The moon rose on the 4th night and Yoriichi found himself mostly alone. A couple of demons tried for him, but he didn't find anyone in danger, hopefully because they were competent enough to care for themselves or already out of final selection. The 5th through 7th nights were silent and almost relaxing for him. The demons steered clear of him. Apparently the stench of demon blood on his blade had grown sharp enough for even the hungriest to avoid him. The closest he got to a demon was on night 6 when one with a snake for a tail fled into the undergrowth at his approach. The morning of the 8th day saw Yoriichi standing close to the wisteria ring, waiting for dawn to rise. He waited until the sun peeked out from the horizon, then stepped across the ring and onto the raised stone path the candidates had waited on all those nights ago. Except for the 2 children in the purple kimonos, he was the first there. They did not greet him and Yoriichi did not say anything to them. He turned slightly away, trying not to look at the one that looked like Master Yubashiki. The next to step out of the trees was the girl in the pink kimono. Her kimono remained bright and clean. No scratches marred her skin and she moved with the same grace as before. It appeared she was uninjured. The boy in the yellow kimono hobbled out of the trees. His clothes and face were dirty, but he was otherwise unharmed. His eyes were wide with terror and muttered under his breath about being doomed to die. Strange, he seemed fine to Yoriichi. The last to leave the ring of wisteria trees was a boy with a mullet and scar across his nose. No injuries on this one either, it seemed. For some reason, though, he let out an angry tch when he saw the others, as if their mere presence insulted him. They waited longer in silence, but no one else appeared. Yoriichi was surprised. Sure, he'd helped a lot of candidates leave the trial and found a couple of bodies, to his regret, but only 4 candidates passed. Why? Was it the test or the quality of the candidates? Welcome back everyone. The 2 children chorused together. They walked over to stand before a table covered by a purple cloth. And congratulations, the white-haired girl said once she and the boy were in position. We are pleased to see you are safe, the black-haired boy added. So, the scarred boy demanded. I made it back alive. What do I do now? Where's my sword? If the children were annoyed by his impatience, they didn't show it. Patience, the girl said. We will first issue you all uniforms. We will start by taking your measurements. Next, your rank will be engraved on the back of your hand. The boy and girl began to list ranks. There were 10 in all apparently. Odd, Yoriichi reflected, they have added so many things. We didn't have uniforms last time around or a way to tell a rank other than skill. You all start at Mizunoto. The boy finished. This is the lowest rank in the Demon Slayer Corps. And our swords. The scarred boy snapped. In a moment, you will be given the chance to choose the ore that will forge your swords, the girl answered. However, it will be 10 to 15 days before the weapons are ready for you. The scarred boy huffed and muttered something to himself. But first, the girl said. She clapped her hands. A dark shape swooped down on Yoriichi from above and landed on his shoulder. The large black crow regarded him with beady, black eyes. Tentatively, Yoriichi reached a hand out and stroked its head. The bird tilted into the touch slightly, before realizing what it was doing and cawing angrily. Yoriichi put his hand down. A crow had settled on the scarred boy's arm as well as the girl in the pink kimonos. The boy in yellow had a sparrow for some reason. What are the crows for? Yoriichi asked. They are kasugai crows, birds used to facilitate communication. The boy in yellow stared at the little sparrow on his hand and finally seemed to jerk out of his terrified daze. Crows? Isn't this a sparrow? He asked. I don't need this crap, the scarred boy yelled, punching his crow. It flew away, cawing in disapproval. Yoriichi watched the boy carefully. He was angry, erratic, and still had a sword clasped on his hip. His instincts whispered the boy was dangerous, to himself and others. The scarred boy stalked past Yoriichi and seized the girl by her short white hair. Who cares about some stupid crow? The boy hissed in the girl's face. I want my sword right now. Give it to me before I get angry. The color-changing katana. I want it now, do you hear me? Yoriichi headed over to the boy and put his hand on the arm holding the girl. Take your hand off, now, Yoriichi said. His voice was calm and hard. Who the hell are you? The scarred boy growled. Yoriichi released him and then stood back a few paces. What's with your face? You're not even gonna look angry when making a threat like that. You ain't got the stone, so give it your best show. Before he had finished speaking, Yoriichi grabbed the boy's wrist and pushed on it, forcing him to release the girl with a cry of pain. He then flipped the boy over his shoulder, slammed him into the stone path with a hard thump. What do I do? The boy in yellow wailed. The scarred boy sat up. He looked dazed for a moment and then his eyes found Yoriichi and narrowed. Are you finished chatting with each other? The black-haired boy asked, face straight. He pulled the purple cloth off the table, revealing tabletop with a bed of red velvet felt and 13 rough, lumpy rocks the size of a child's head. Now the time has come, the boy announced. Please select an ore to use for your sword. The scarred boy got to his feet, forgetting about Yoriichi now that his precious sword was being dangled under his nose. The steel you will use to protect yourself and slay demons will be of your own choosing, the girl said. All 4 candidates lined up in front of the table, staring at the rocks. Yoriichi considered using the transparent world for a moment and then decided against it. Rocks weren't living organisms, so he wouldn't see anything anyway. But what if I could sense something? Yoriichi pondered. He focused his newly honed 6th sense on the rock. Most of them felt the same, but a rock in the middle of the back row had a barely detectable trace of heat. It's been deep, Yoriichi realized, close to the middle of the earth, where legend says the sun kami Amaterasu hid. The earth is said to still be warm where she hid. That was the story his mother had told him as a child, and Yoriichi wasn't sure he believed it. But he still stepped forward and reached out for the warm rock. It was more misshapen than the others and slightly smaller too. It didn't look like much, but then neither did he. Yoriichi picked up and stood back. You want that one? The boy asked. Yoriichi nodded. Just say it then, the scarred boy grumbled. Freaking weirdo. The black-haired man with scarred face sat on the porch with a black crow wearing a purple scarf sitting on his hand. In the other was a small paper scroll, the report from his son on this year's final selection. 5 of them managed to survive, the man said. His voice was melodious without seeming high-pitched or feminine. That's excellent. The number of my children continues to grow. Then his eyes fell on the rest of the letter and widened slightly. He always asked for 3 specific details on a final selection: the initial number of candidates, the number of candidates who passed, and the number of slain candidates. Anyone who didn't manage to get out of the force by the end of the 8th was considered to be dead. The number of slain was always high and usually included the number of candidates who started minus the successful candidates, with maybe 3 at most escaping into the wisteria circle and surviving without passing the test. The number of slain this time. The man rubbed his eyes and stared at the number again. It remained the same, 4. Only 4 candidates had died on the mountain this year. There was a small note written under the number. Candidates came out of the forest into the circle in high numbers from the first night to the 4th. A few were scarred out of their wits, but several had serious injuries. We were able to treat them and they were sent on their way. If they'd stayed in the forest with those injuries, they'd have died from them or been eaten by a demon. A few lucid ones described a boy with a fox mask and reddish-brown hair. The description matches one Tanjiro Komado, a student of Urokodaki's. Tanjiro Komado, the man mused. What kind of swordsman will be? Yoriichi's pace as he returned to Mount Sajiri and Urokodaki's little cabin was slower than he would have liked. Apart from a couple bruises and small scrapes, he'd ended final selection with no injuries, but his entire body felt like lead. It was too much, Yoriichi realized. Saving the others was too much for me to take on alone. If we'd stayed in the forest longer, I might have permanently injured this body. The thought filled him with so much frustration. His normally blank expression almost broke. His fingers twitched slightly, as if wanting to make a fist, but not daring to. All that training, all that effort, and it still isn't enough. I can barely use water breathing to its highest potential, and if I tried sun breathing, my bones would snap in half like useless twigs after one move. I can't understand it. Why would I be given a second chance, only to be stuck in a body weaker than my old one? He continued on for a few more steps, eyeing the sun and its position slightly above the horizon. It would be dark soon and he needed to pick up the pace if he wanted to make it back by nightfall. His body didn't get the message. The sun was long gone and chill night breezes were stirring the trees as he reached the clearing around the hut at the base of the mountain. Yoriichi came to a stop outside the hut, listening for any noises to show if Urokodaki was awake or not. The door fell outward so suddenly that Yoriichi jumped. Nezuko strode out on top and then turned to face him. You're awake, Yoriichi said in surprise. Nezuko hurried over and wrapped her arms tightly around him. Yoriichi stood, his arms awkwardly raised, unsure what to do. Tanjiro Komado would know what to do in this situation. But Tanjiro Komado was dead. His memories weren't though, so Yoriichi slowly hugged Nezuko back. Both siblings closed their eyes. They didn't speak, but they didn't need to either. The hug expressed their feelings well, every bit of fear, loneliness, and joy. Yoriichi let himself get lost in the moment, in the love of a family he hadn't dared think about in days. I will protect you. Kibutsuji can't take you. I won't let him, Yoriichi promised silently. Urokodaki came around the corner with a bundle of firewood under his arm. He'd heard the sound of the door falling to the ground again and sighed inwardly. When would that demon girl learn to slide the door aside instead of kicking it down? The sight of Nezuko standing in his yard was unsurprising. But then he noticed a pair of arms clad in light blue sleeves and a head of dark reddish-brown hair poking up over the top of her. The faint, ghostly scent tremoring in the air confirmed the truth. Tanjiro. Urokodaki realized Tanjiro has returned. The former water Hashira stepped forward, the bundle of kindling clattering to the ground in a forgotten heap. After a few slow, disbelieving steps, Urokodaki surged forward and put an arm around both Tanjiro and Nezuko. The boy's skin was warm, almost feverish, while the demon girl's was unnaturally cold. Both of them were solid and real. The hollow ache which had been eating a hole in his chest since Tanjiro's departure disappeared. The weight of all his children, so many of his children, who he'd been helpless to save, vanished. Relief and joy brought tears to his eyes, which rolled down from beneath his mask, onto his chin, and then to the ground. Then he spoke the only words that would come, "You're here. You came back alive." Logs crackled in the hearth as Urokodaki and Yoriichi sat face one another on woven mats. To one side, Nezuko lay on a futon, her expression peaceful as she slumbered. "You did it. You were able to kill that mutated demon," Urokodaki said. Yoriichi nodded. "Then it's over," Urokodaki said, his shoulders slumping slightly beneath his sky-blue tunic. "I am truly impressed that you made it back," he added. Yoriichi dipped his head slightly. "Thanks. I couldn't have done it with you or Sabito and Makumo." Urokodaki jerked slightly, as if stung. "Tanjiro, where did you learn those names?" he demanded sharply. Unbothered, Yoriichi told him about the boulder and the two ghost children who'd haunted it. The training they'd given him had been vital. More than that, they were the only friends he'd made as himself rather than just Tanjiro. "They won't be there anymore," Yoriichi summarized. "They said that if the demon was defeated, they'd pass on or haunt something else they are tied to strongly. I don't know which one they chose. We'll probably never see them again regardless." Urokodaki nodded, too stunned to speak. He barely had time to process that Makumo and Sabito had been so near to him this entire time, much less that he might be able to speak with them. Still, a tiny part of his mind grieved at losing a second, unlooked-for chance to say goodbye. "They told me all about the mutated demon," Yoriichi said. "Why didn't you?" Yoriichi's tone hadn't been accusatory, had retained its customary flatness. In fact, he could still feel Urokodaki's hidden eyes scanning his face for signs of anger, though. "I couldn't," Urokodaki said finally. "I didn't know much about the demon to begin with. In the past, my vague warnings about a mutated demon targeting my apprentices only made it easier for him to kill them. I have no idea whether it implanted a seed of fear or rage or had some other effect. It was never enough, so I stopped warning students directly. I never meant to harm you or leave you vulnerable." Urokodaki bowed, folding in half until his forehead touched the mat he sat on. "Tanjirou Komado, you have my sincere apologies for the danger you faced and my heartfelt thanks for allowing the others to finally rest in peace." Silence reigned. Yoriichi blinked and looked at Urokodaki, unsure what to do. "The danger was not your fault," he said finally. "What that demon chose to do was his own choice." Urokodaki rose back to a sitting position. After another awkward pause, he began to tell Yoriichi about blood demon arts and the powers they could bestow. Yoriichi had learned much of what Urokodaki told him firsthand, but this time, a question occurred to him. "Nezuko seems different. Do you think it's due to a blood demon art?" Urokodaki looked over at the sleeping demon girl. "I don't think so. I think it's something else entirely. Rather than replenish her energy by eating human flesh like other demons, I think she can replace her energy by sleeping." Yoriichi felt relieved. He'd been wondering how to keep Nezuko alive without a food source and hadn't come up with any alternatives. It seemed she'd solved that problem on her own. As he sat against the wall watching his sister's bed earlier that night, Yoriichi felt a bit of pride in Nezuko for accomplishing something so incredible. Eventually, the exhaustion from final selection and traveling caught up to him and he fell asleep. For the next 2 weeks, Yoriichi didn't do much. His first week was spent recovering his energy from final selection. Urokodaki didn't comment on his lack of energy or unusually slow movements. He did make sure that Yoriichi ate plenty, though, and slept a decent amount of hours each night. The second week, Yoriichi began to do some light training. Some exercises were his own or learned from Sabito or Makumo. A few times Urokodaki would teach him a new one or help him with a particularly hard technique. Despite it all, it was a period of peace and Yoriichi would look back on it fondly years later. The tinkling of bells brought it all to an end. A tall figure wearing a large straw basket-like hat with bells on the rim and a long, slim bundle tied across his back approached Urokodaki's hut. When he got closer, Yoriichi could see that he had a mask like Urokodaki's on his face. The stranger's was more pink than red, though, and had a round mouth with round, bulging cheeks. Combine the wide eyes, it made him look like he was constantly trying to whistle. "Welcome," Yoriichi said. "My name is Nezuko. I have forged Tanjiro Komado's sword. I am here to deliver it." For a half a second, Yoriichi had no idea why Nezuko had showed up. Then he remembered Tanjiro Komado was his name, sort of. "Sorry, and Tanjiro Komado. Please come in," Yoriichi said, bowing and indicating the hut. The man carefully took the long bundle down from his shoulders and began to unwrap it. "This is a Nichiren sword. I forged it myself," he explained. "Do you want to come in?" Yoriichi asked, unimpressed. Ignoring him, the man pointed up to the sky and started talking about scarlet ore and the mountain close to the sun. Yoriichi dutifully listened to the smith's lecture. He wondered why the man was so proper and subdued when his heart was beating fast and his presence was so bold. When the lecture came to its abrupt end, he got his answer. "Are you listening to me?" Nezuko demanded, thrusting his masked face inches away from Yoriichi's face. "Yes," Yoriichi said, face blank and tone without inflection. Beneath the mask, Nezuko squinted at the boy, trying to figure out if he was lying or sarcastic. In the end, he couldn't figure out. How could he when the brat's face had less expression than his own mask? So he moved on. "Hey, you're a child of brightness, aren't you?" Nezuko demanded. "Well, isn't that lucky?" "Thank you," Yoriichi said. "You know how your hair and eyes have a reddish hue to them?" Nezuko said, pointing at Yoriichi's long hair. "When a family that works with fire has a child like you, it's considered lucky." The smith's finger thrust into Yoriichi's cheek. Yoriichi simply continued to look at Nezuko, as if one of the man's fingers wasn't drilling into his face. "Is it?" "I had no idea," Yoriichi said, his tone flat. "That means there's a good chance this sword will turn red," Nezuko stated, gesturing at the cloth-wrapped sword sitting in the open box. The smith cackled and said something else, but Yoriichi was no longer listening. He was thinking back to the sword he wielded in his last life. A unique, distinctive bright red one. None of the other demon slayers had one quite like it. Not even the Hashira who invented the breathing style. If this sword turns bright red, Yoriichi thought, all my lies will be for nothing. I'll be recognized by Muzan for sure. Urokodaki came out the door and ushered both his former apprentice and the swordsmith inside. As Yoriichi sat with the sword in his hands, nervous roiled behind his usual mask like the water at the bottom of the waterfall on the mountain. "Come on, draw it already," Nezuko said, waving his hands. Nichiren swords are also known as color-changing swords because depending on the bearer they change color. It seemed Yoriichi couldn't stall any longer. He slowly pulled the blade out of its sheath and silently prayed for blue, green, yellow, or even pink. Not red. Anything but red. As Yoriichi held the blade up with both hands, it changed color. He'd gotten his wish. The katana wasn't red, it was pitch black. Urokodaki commented on the color and Nezuko let out an angry burst of steam. For his part, Yoriichi felt a bit dumb. Now he remembered that his sword hadn't actually been bright red all the time. It only did that when he used sun breathing. Not that he was going to tell Nezuko that. Even when the man wrestled him to the ground and howled his disappointment and anger, Yoriichi let the smith work out his emotion for a few moments and then threw the man off without a problem. "I am sorry," Yoriichi said. Nezuko leaped up and tried to get Yoriichi again. Yoriichi was still dodging the man when the Kasugai crow landed on the floor of the hut. "Tanjiro Komado," the crow said. "I bring you orders. You must go to a town northwest of here. Hurry, young girls are disappearing. Every night another girl vanishes. Every night." Yoriichi thought, "I'd better move quickly. Every night that passes will mean another death. You must hunt down the demon responsible and destroy it." "Tanjiro Komado, prepare yourself well," the bird cried. "This is your first assignment as a member of the Demon Slayer Corps." Yoriichi tightened his grip slightly on his sword. Over a decade of hiding from the truth, of letting demons roam free and kill because he couldn't be bothered to leave his new family, his happy life. It was time for him to begin atoning for all the lives he'd allowed to fade away. At long last, one of the war's fiercest soldiers would be returning to the battlefield. Large towns had never been Yoriichi's favorite place to visit. The number of presences made his head ache and the feeling of eyes on him made his skin crawl. As he left the wooden bridge and entered the town streets, he could hear whispers, wondering what the strange boy had in the box. If the sword he carried was real, what kind of uniform he had on, and where on earth did get that weird scar on his forehead. Not everyone was talking about him, of course. A few women off to the right were discussing a new kimono, and a couple men chatted about their most recent haul of fish. Any attention, however, made Yoriichi feel uncomfortable, and he found himself hunching slightly inside his new uniform. "Let's find this demon quickly, Nezuko," Yoriichi muttered. He thought he heard an assenting grunt from inside the box, but wasn't sure. Yoriichi wasn't worried about Nezuko, though. The box had been a parting gift from Urokodaki and seemed well made. All the effort Urokodaki must have gone through for him and Nezuko. It almost overwhelmed him. Thoughts of a certain flute, crude and unrefined but made with care by small hands, danced in Yoriichi's thoughts, bringing with them bittersweet memories. "Whoa, look, there's Kazumi," one woman whispered to her small group of friends. "Poor thing, he doesn't look good," one of her friends agreed. Yoriichi turned to look at the women and followed the direction of their gazes to see a young man in a blue kimono and brown haori. His pale face was bruised and the skin around his purple eyes was sunken. The young man wobbled slightly as he walked and seemed dazed. Could he have seen something? Yoriichi wondered. "It's happening every night," an older man commented. "It's very creepy. Tragic, dreadful," a woman close to him said. "As soon as night falls, another will be abducted," the third member of the group, a second woman, exclaimed. Kazumi didn't turn around at the sound of those words, but Yoriichi thought he saw the young man's shoulders stiffen. He definitely knew something. Yoriichi called out to Kazumi and he turned around, expression still unfocused. "Tell me what happened last night," Yoriichi said. For a moment, it seemed Kazumi hadn't registered the words. Then he gave a jerky nod and indicated for Yoriichi to follow him. Kazumi stopped in the middle of a narrow road between two fences. The section of dirt path beneath their feet appeared unremarkable. No blood or other sign that a human died there. "This is where Satako vanished," Kazumi explained. His voice was surprisingly steady and he seemed more alert than he had earlier. "But I'm sure you don't believe me." "I do," Yoriichi said. "I'm here to help." Kazumi frowned and studied Yoriichi's face as if trying to figure out if the demon slayer was joking. A quick scan of the area showed no signs of a demon, but Yoriichi's time with Urokodaki hadn't been for nothing. He could feel scattered bits and pieces of demon presence, faint yet undeniable. He stared at the ground and focused on the transparent world, allowing himself to see beyond the physical. The small patterns of energy swirled beneath his feet, the majority leading off down the street and back toward town. Yoriichi started walking, his eyes fixed firmly on the ground to track the energy. The trail was confusing. After it suddenly split a couple of times, Yoriichi realized that he was mixing traces left behind from previous attacks with the last known attack. Focusing on the brighter, fresher signatures helped more, and eventually he stopped in an alleyway between two houses. There, several hundred meters deep into the ground, he could see a pulsing heart and slightly heaving set of lungs. Neither of them was human. The energy outlined a humanoid shape with horns and long hair curled up into a ball. "I can't reach it with water breathing," Yoriichi thought. "Maybe if used." Yoriichi shook his head. He couldn't use sun breathing. Not with his current level of strength and body. Without a way to reach the demon when he was holed up like this during the day, Yoriichi had no choice. He had to wait. He's been attacking every night. When he comes for a new victim, I'll have my chance. But what if he didn't get to the demon in time? What if it killed the girl before he had the chance to stop it? Another girl would die and it would be all his fault. "I want you to believe me. She really did just vanish," Kazumi said from behind Yoriichi. Yoriichi blinked. Kazumi was still here. He'd thought the young man was long gone. He turned slightly to regard Kazumi. "I'm here to make sure this never happens again," Yoriichi said. Sunset was turning the sky around them red. It wouldn't be long before the demon woke up and started hunting. Yoriichi walked a short ways away from the spot where the demon lay hidden and stopped. For a moment, the two men stood there, Yoriichi watching the ground intently and Kazumi looking at Yoriichi with a confused expression. "It's getting dark out," Kazumi said finally. "I know you're concerned about this, but shouldn't you rest? Pick it up again in the morning." "They are only active at night," Yoriichi replied. Suddenly the demon beneath the ground stirred. Eyes opened and looked down the street past Yoriichi. The demon shot out from underneath Yoriichi's feet like a bullet, still keeping low. Yoriichi ran after it with Kazumi behind him, too confused to ask questions. The demon was getting closer and closer to the surface, but was still too far away when it shot under a fence. Yoriichi gathered himself and was about to leap when a feminine scream rang out. They were out of time. Yoriichi stared into the transparent world, hard, and saw the demon plunging back under the ground, but not going as deep as before. The demon heart had been joined by a smaller, wildly beating human heart. The demon was heading around the other side of the house. Every ounce of Yoriichi's strength went into his legs as he dashed around the house and towards the side where the demon would emerge. He stopped on a street in the demon's path, and a rasp rang out as Yoriichi pulled his sword from the sheath. Leaping up into the air, Yoriichi struck downwards, cutting deeply into the ground. The ground exploded into mud and Yoriichi saw the back of a green flowery kimono. Grabbing it, he pulled the girl wearing it into his arms and then jumped back, away from the demon. A hand emerged from an inkai black hole in the ground, still clutching a scrap of the kimono, and then was replaced by a demon with 3 horns emerging from its forehead. A head of thick black and purple hair flowed down its back and shoulders. Red eyes glared at Yoriichi, who gazed back passively, the unconscious girl held in his arms. The demon began to click his teeth, grinding them savagely. It seemed to be an expression of frustration. Something about it was too rhythmic, though. The demon's head disappeared back into the black puddle without warning. Kazumi arrived at Yoriichi's side just as the top of its head vanished. Who was that? Yoriichi thrust the girl at Kazumi. Hold her. Stay close. Numbly, Kazumi took the girl in his arms, leaving Yoriichi free to hold his sword in a guard position. As Yoriichi watched through the transparent world, another 2 hearts and pairs of lungs appeared, each with the same presence and outline as the first. They shot up at him, all 3 pairs of hands grasping for him at once. Yoriichi, however, was already in the air and his sword sweeping in a downward arch as he dove towards them. 3 arms, each from a different demon, flew up into the air. The demons hissed in anger, their arms already beginning to regenerate as they dove back down into the earth. Yoriichi stood in front of Kazumi and the girl, eyes scanning the ground, tracking the demon's movements. He needed to go for the head this time to end this. 1 demon emerged behind Kazumi and Yoriichi flipped over Kazumi and the girl, slashing his blade in a circle. With Kazumi and the girl in the way, Yoriichi couldn't get a good angle. His blade sliced deep into the shoulder instead of the neck. The demon vanished again and then emerged 50 meters further down the street. He opened his mouth and began to shout at Yoriichi. Bastard, she'll go stale, the demon said. The girl's already 16 and losing flavor by the second. If I wait any longer, there won't be any left at all. A second demon emerged behind Kazumi and began trying to calm the other one, saying that nights like this happened. Considering that all 3 were likely the same demon, it said something about the demon's fractured mental state. Bring Sasako back, Kazumi demanded. The girl you took the other night. A 3rd demon emerged on the roof. It and another demon began grinding their teeth in that weird chattering way while the reasonable one spoke. Sasako, the demon asked. Which one was that? He gave a smile that was all teeth and then opened his jacket to reveal several ornate hairpins and a ribbon. If her hairpin is in this collection, then I'm afraid I've already eaten her. Sorry. By look on Katsumi's face and his tears, her hairpin was certainly among that bunch. If Yuta had been taken like that or Nezuko. Yoriichi's heart went out to Kazumi and then his thoughts sharpened to razor-sharp points as rage descended on him. The demon dove back into the inkai black pool and headed up into the stone wall of a courtyard, ready to slash at Yoriichi from behind. Yoriichi whirled around and slashed with his blade at the point where the demon's neck would be when it emerged. His blade sliced through the edge of the demon's collarbone and it let out an angry grunt before going back into the ground. He'd been too slow, reflexes still not developed enough to keep up with his sight. As if to illustrate the point, the demon began popping out of the walls and floor rapid fire. Each time, Yoriichi struck and chopped off an arm or grazed hair. It wasn't enough. The demon headed for Yoriichi's back and suddenly the door to the box flew open. A leg emerged and hit the demon so hard his head spun, literally. Nezuko stepped out of the box and rose to her full height. Her Sakura Blossom pink eyes glared at the other demon with slit pupils. Why in the world would a demon travel with a mere human? Another copy of the demon on the ground said incredulously. It doesn't make any sense. The copy which had spoken sank below the ground and the one Nezuko had kicked straightened his neck from the corkscrew Nezuko had twisted it into and also disappeared into the dirt. Yoriichi watched the trio of demons regroup underground and waited for them to attack. Nezuko's eyes lost their slit pupils and she turned to Kazumi and the girl. Kazumi backed away as she approached him and Yoriichi tensed. Nezuko did not attack Kazumi. Reaching out, she laid a gentle hand on Kazumi's cheek and the girl's head. Urokodaki's hypnotism worked, Yoriichi thought. He'd been skeptical when Urokodaki told him that he'd convinced Nezuko all humans were her family and demons were the enemy. Hypnotizing a demon. It couldn't be done, could it? It seemed now that Urokodaki was right. Once again, Yoriichi's lack of knowledge about demons outside the battlefield bothered him. Turning his attention back to the demons underground, Yoriichi spotted two of them swooping towards the surface. His sword came up in a traditional guard. The two demons surfaced and Nezuko turned to face them. Veins popped out all over her forehead and she charged at them, trying to slam an axe kick down on the nearest demon's forehead. The demon dove beneath the ground and her kick slammed into the dirt, setting up a small cloud of dust. The second demon smirked at her before retreating below ground himself. "Nezuko, don't chase him," Yoriichi ordered. Nezuko turned around and looked him quizzically. "Come to me," Yoriichi said. He needed her close so he could protect her and the two people behind him. Surprisingly, Nezuko listened to him, running back towards him with her arms spread to either side like a child pretending to be a bird. The demon popped up in Nezuko's path, reaching out for her with an angry snarl. Nezuko simply jumped over him and continued the rest of the way to her brother and the other two people. "She's strong," Yoriichi realized. "Strong enough to take care of herself. I need to stop seeing her as a sister in need of protection." She became a fellow warrior the moment she joined this fight. Just like a Michikatsu, his thought barely finished before he spotted the demon striking upwards again. Nezuko easily dodged the strike and gave him a hard kick to the side. Growling, the demon went back under. Yoriichi looked down at the Inkai puddle spreading around the area in a wide, roughly circular splash. Staying up on the surface like this wasn't going to work. It gave the demon all the advantage. He needed to attack them in their hiding spot, show them it wasn't safe. Looking over at Nezuko, Yoriichi said, "I am going underground, can you protect them for me?" Nezuko's eyes widened slightly and she nodded, giving an affirmative grunt. Taking a deep breath, Yoriichi stepped into the puddle and immediately sank down into the depths. The murky soup. Yoriichi opened his eyes and was thick, more like mud from a swamp than a pool of water. Several brightly colored pieces of clothing floated around Yoriichi. He knew instantly what they were, the leftovers from past meals. The demon must have eaten most of the girls taken from the town in this area. There were so many of them, it made him feel sick. The transparent world showed him two of the demon's copies floating a few meters away and watching him. "Getting hard to breathe yet. There is hardly any air in this swamp," one taunted. "Not to mention the darkness closing in only adds to the weight you feel," the second one added. The two of them cackled and then began circling sharks, preparing to attack. Yoriichi watched them intently, noting the way their lungs sucked in the water like it was air. They were wrong about the dark, of course. Like the sun, Yoriichi had gone below the horizon into the darkness. Much like the sun, the darkness parted before and he could see perfectly. Patiently, Yoriichi waited for the two demons to get in close and strike at him. They both in reach of his blade when he twisted his body, quickly and violently to create a power vortex of water and flashing steel. The two demons were sucked into the vortex and torn to pieces by Yoriichi's blade. He watched as their hearts beat frantically and then swiftly stopped. Satisfied they were dead, Yoriichi looked up at the surface and kicked upwards toward it. Nezuko's familiar presence outlined her body. Yoriichi could see her heart pumping rapidly and her lungs squeezing more forcefully as she fought the demon. It looked like she was holding her own and her opponent's heart and presence sang of his fear of her. Just before Yoriichi reached the surface, he saw Nezuko retreat from the other demon, whose heart suddenly quickened and presence swelled in triumph. The demon thought he was about to finish Nezuko off. Charging from the pool and onto the ground, Yoriichi ran past Nezuko and sliced both of the demon's arms at the elbows. The demon fell against one of the stone walls and cowered. "I was doing it for their own good," the demon babbled. "If women live too long they get ugly and don't taste good." The look Yoriichi gave him shut the demon up more effectively than if the slayer had cut out his tongue. He places no value on human life, Yoriichi thought in disgust. "What do you know about Muzan Kibutsuji?" Yoriichi asked. His voice was quiet, the tone calm, but firm. The demon still acted like Yoriichi had screamed obscenities and curses at him. Both the demon's red eyes went wide and he looked even more terrified than before. "I can't tell you," the demon whimpered. "I can't do it." "I understand," Yoriichi said. Then he cut the demon's head off in one swift stroke. Yoriichi watched the demon crumble into ash and then bowed his head in a swift prayer for the human the monster had once been. Turning, he saw Nezuko leaning against the wall. She had 4 parallel scratches on her forehead, likely from the demon's claws, but was otherwise unharmed. A quick look in the transparent world confirmed she was asleep. Carefully, Yoriichi tucked her back into the box and then shouldered it again. Next, he went to Kazumi, who was sitting on the ground not far from the unconscious girl rescued from the demon. "Are you all right?" Yoriichi asked. "I lost my fiancé. How can I be all right?" Kazumi said, his eyes tearing up. Yoriichi winced internally. Even with Tanjiro's experiences, he still couldn't get this whole emotional thing right. Best to cut his losses right here and go. He turned. Wait, what am I supposed to do now? Kazumi said. The man was up in seconds and grabbing the collar of Yoriichi's Hayori. Kazumi glared furiously at him. Live, Yoriichi said simply. Like your fiancé would want you to. Kazumi opened his mouth, but he didn't have a good comeback. He let go of Yoriichi's Hayori. Yoriichi started to leave again, then saw a familiar-looking scrap of fabric on the ground. He remembered the demon holding and displaying trinkets from his victims. Grabbing it, Yoriichi handed it to Kazumi. Something of your fiancé might be in there. Find a way to get the ones from the other girls to their families, Yoriichi said. Kazumi burst into fresh tears and Yoriichi felt even worse. He decided to leave before he made Kazumi even more upset with his inept attempts at comfort. Yoriichi was most of the way down the alley when he heard Kazumi utter two soft words. Thank you. Kibutsuji is keeping a firmer grip on them, Yoriichi thought. Before, he never cared much if other demons talked about him. He always considered himself invincible. Why the change? Could it be that you are afraid? Can you feel the tide of battle beginning to turn against you at last? Hey kid, look out, someone yelled. Yoriichi's eyes opened and he instinctively dodged the cart thundering down the street towards him. The driver yelled something about blank-faced idiots, but he was gone before Yoriichi could hear much of his rant. Giving a slight bow to the older man across the street, who was glaring at him and puffing up his cheeks like he was about to shout again, Yoriichi ducked down a side alley. He reminded himself that cities were not the kind of places where he could afford to get distracted. There were more dangers than just demons in the world, though. His crow had told him there was a demon stalking the city. Nezuko kicked the door to her box open and stood up. After her sleep, the scratches on her forehead had completely healed. She still seemed sleepy, though, as she took his hand and followed him through the alleyways. Demons aren't the type to hide in well-lit places full of people, Yoriichi thought. They use cities to hide in plain sight, but they can't kill in front of people without revealing their true natures. The demon will have to come into one of these alleys at some point. Unfortunately, demons were not the only creatures to prefer alleys. Several times Yoriichi had to move past ragged shapes that stunk of sake and opium. Worse by far were the couples. Most of them ignored Yoriichi as he slipped past them with his eyes fixed steadily away from them. A few, however, noticed Yoriichi and Nezuko and called out to them. Yoriichi had to strike a fat man reaching out for Nezuko with his hilt at one point. A couple other men shouted offers to him for Nezuko. None of them tried to lay a finger on his sister, so Yoriichi kept moving. One woman even sized up Yoriichi as he walked past, offered to get the blank look off his handsome face. Yoriichi ignored her like the rest. How could anyone make offers like that to a random stranger? He never would understand people. They reached a quieter of the city without finding a demon. But Yoriichi did find an udon stand. He requested a bowl and then sat down with Nezuko. The demon girl nodded sleepily a few times before putting her head on Yoriichi's shoulders. Yoriichi froze, unsure what to do for a moment, and then tentatively stroked Nezuko's hair. She made a quiet please sound, so he guessed she must have liked it. Here's your udon. Let me know how you like it, the stall owner said, handing over the bowl of food. Thanks, Yoriichi said. You could at least sound happy, the stall owner grumbled as he turned away. Yoriichi brought the bowl to his lips and took a sip. As he took a few bits of the noodles, he reached out with his sixth sense, attempting to find a trace of the demon to follow. What he got back was more than a trace. 3 demons were in the marketplace, a couple blocks away. 2 of them felt moderately powerful, but the third overwhelmed the rest. It blazed like a dark sun in Yoriichi's senses, reaching out with corrosive energy to turn the very air around it foul. Yoriichi almost dropped the bowl because he recognized that dark sun, Muzan Kibutsuji. Carefully, Yoriichi set the mostly full bowl of udon on the bench and stood up. The stall owner shouted something, but Yoriichi couldn't hear him. He glanced at Nezuko. She was asleep, so he should have no trouble leaving her behind. Gripping his sword, Yoriichi raced through the alleys to the busy street where he sensed Kibutsuji. The crowd of people on the street made getting through hard, but Yoriichi eventually pushed his way through. The mass of people parted and Yoriichi found himself face to face with Kibutsuji. The Demon King wore a Western-style suit now and a white broad-brimmed hat. There was no mistaking those red eyes, and their barely contained malice. Said eyes widened slightly as he took in Yoriichi, and Yoriichi thought he saw recognition there. Before Yoriichi could speak or draw his sword, he noticed something that made him freeze. Kibutsuji was holding a little girl in his arms. A little girl who asked him what was wrong. I can't attack him, Yoriichi thought. Not when he has a child as a hostage. I'm sorry, is there something I can do for you? You seem a bit lost, Kibutsuji said. Confusion joined Yoriichi's fear for the girl and his anger at Kibutsuji. Why would the demon lord ask him a question like that? Yoriichi could only be here for one reason, to kill him. "Darling, is something the matter?" a woman in white hat with a blue bow asked. The little girl smiled and said something to her mother. Yoriichi added the woman to the current number of Kibutsuji's hostages. "I have never seen him before," Kibutsuji explained to the woman, his wife. "Maybe she could only be a fake, though. He must have me confused with someone else." The woman said something. Yoriichi didn't hear her. Kibutsuji's fingernails had lengthened to claw on his free hand, and Yoriichi could only watch in horror as the Demon King slashed them across the back of a passing man's neck. He moved so quickly Yoriichi would never have caught the motion if he hadn't been on his guard already. The man clamped a hand to his neck and instantly started to change. His teeth lengthened and his mouth filled with saliva as he lunged at the woman he'd been walking with. She screamed as he bit into her shoulder. Yoriichi lunged forward and jerked the man off the woman. He pinned the man to the ground with an arm across his neck. The man's limbs flailed and tried to scratch at Yoriichi, but couldn't quite reach him. The people around him and the man, now mostly demon, stopped, staring. "Put pressure on her wound," Yoriichi commanded. "We don't want her to bleed more." In the background, he heard Kibutsuji comforting his fake family and talking them into walking away. Yoriichi didn't react or try to follow. Now that his anger was fading, Yoriichi realized that coming at Kibutsuji when his own strength was still so low was a mistake. Kibutsuji fought dirty and he wouldn't hesitate to use humans or demons as shields. Yoriichi needed to fight him somewhere away from people and to be able to stop the Demon King from using them. He lacked the strength to do that, and now an innocent man was paying the price. With Kibutsuji's departure, the two lesser demon presences leaped into focus. They were on the same street as Yoriichi and were likely among the crowd watching Yoriichi try to keep the newly formed demon pinned to the ground. Were they Kibutsuji's bodyguards? Would they pounce on him now that their leader was clear? As if Yoriichi didn't have enough problems, he heard shouts from a group of policemen. One demanded to know what was going on while another ordered him off the demon. "I'm the only one who can restrain this person. I can't get off him," Yoriichi explained. "Get off of him," the cop insisted. Yoriichi stared at him, stone-faced. He couldn't let the demon up or more innocents would die tonight. Killing it right here and now was his only option. The cops would think he was murderer and hunting demons in public would be harder, but it was the best he could do. Just as the cop reached the end of his patience and started forward to physically pull him off, Yoriichi managed to pin the demon with a single arm and all of his legs for long enough to reach for his sword. Before he could pull it out and strike where the cop grabbed him, though, a wave of flowers suddenly appeared in mid-air. The scent Yoriichi breathed was sweet and cloying, but he still recognized the scent of blood. The cop stumbled away as the flowers swirled around him and his companions. Then a soft, melodic voice spoke. "I beg your pardon, but you said person." "Even though this particular person is now a demon," she said. Yoriichi looked up and confirmed what his senses had already told him. The two demons were standing a few feet away, watching him. The shorter one took the form of a boy with a white haori and a hard expression. The taller one seemed like a woman in a flower kimono with her hair pinned back into a bun. She appeared familiar for some reason. Her arm was also bleeding. She was the one creating the scent and the flowers. "Now you are trying to save him. If you don't mind, I would like to lend a hand," the woman continued. "Why would a couple of demons want to help?" Yoriichi asked. The woman's eyes widened slightly. "Interesting. Even with my scent confusing your senses, you can tell what I am." She smiled and seemed to regain her composure. "I am a demon, but I am also a doctor. I want to help and to destroy Kibutsuji as well." When Yoriichi went to retrieve Nezuko from the udon stand, he was faced with the wrath of its owner. "I'll still pay for the udon," Yoriichi told him. "I could care less about that. What I am angry about is that you walked away from a perfectly good bowl of udon." The man howled. "Can I get another bowl then?" Yoriichi asked. He'd hoped this would mollify the man, but it only made him more passionate. He made Yoriichi promise to eat it and then started to get in Nezuko's face, asking her about the bamboo gag and tell her to take it off to eat the udon. Yoriichi pulled the owner away from her and requested 2 bowls. "Okay, but why?" "You didn't want the first one," the man said. "If you put this much passion into your dishes, they are sure to be tasty," Yoriichi said. The man felt himself starting to tear up. It was the nicest thing someone had ever said. Now if the stranger customer would get that blank expression of his face and actually smile. The owner made the 2 bowls of udon and watched in amazement as Yoriichi downed them both. Yoriichi needed all the fuel he could get. He also hadn't been lying to the shop owner. The pride the owner took in his wares was evident in the taste, and Yoriichi enjoyed every bite. "Thank you," he said, putting the empty bowls on the stall's counter along with the money to pay for it. It was delicious. Yoriichi took Nezuko's hand and waved awkwardly at the owner. "Thank you," the owner said. "Come back again. I'm going to get a smile on your face next time for sure." The food had been good and Yoriichi hoped he could come back. Maybe when he did, he could try to fake up a smile. Tanjiro had enough experience smiling that Yoriichi had to have some knowledge about how to do it hidden somewhere in his head, right? A demon presence ahead of Yoriichi, and Nezuko made him pause and put a hand on his sword. The demon boy in the white Haori from earlier stepped out, however. "Are you waiting for us?" Yoriichi asked. "I'm here on her orders," the demon boy sniffed. "I'm supposed to bring you back with me." The woman had said something about that when Yoriichi had let her and the boy take the newly formed demon. Yoriichi told her that he had to go get Nezuko first. "I could have found you on my own." "Using what?" "Scent. Our hiding place is protected by a concealing spell. You'd never have found it." Yoriichi wondered if that was true. He hadn't met a blood art yet that was a match for his presence sensing or the transparent world. "Before we go, did you know that girl is a demon?" "Yes," Yoriichi said. "She's also not much to look at," the boy said. "You prefer women who are taller then, with long brown hair, purple eyes, and a willowy build. Maybe an older woman who also happens to be a doctor." The boy clenched his hands into fists. His cheeks burned. "I don't know what you are talking about." He'd hit a nerve. Even Yoriichi's inept social skills could tell that much. The boy had it coming, though, so Yoriichi didn't stop. "I am talking about your type. You do have one, don't you? An ideal woman in mind. Maybe you've already met her. Do you fantasize about?" "Shut up," the demon boy shouted, looking horrified. He quickly turned around. "Let's go." Taking a confused Nezuko's arm, Yoriichi followed the demon boy through the streets without another word. Inwardly, he smirked. That should teach him not to insult Nezuko. A few minutes later, they were in a maze of fences surrounding properties on the edge of town. The demon boy phased through the fence. Yoriichi and Nezuko followed right behind him. The demon boy turned back towards the fence. "Hurry," he started and then stopped when he saw Yoriichi and Nezuko standing in the yard. For his part, Yoriichi looked at the two-story house and the surrounding courtyard. The house appeared roomy and well-made and the courtyard was spacious and clean. Not a temporary base then. The demon boy and the woman must have been here a while. "Pay attention," the demon boy shouted. Yoriichi met his gaze and the boy frowned at him. "Now, make sure you do not offend the lady," the demon said. "I do not normally offend ladies," Yoriichi replied. The demon boy's frown became a scowl. He glared at Yoriichi, but apparently couldn't figure out if Yoriichi was serious or not. Turning back to the front door of the house, he opened it then gave them one final caution. "I couldn't care less what happens to you. I only brought you here because she insisted." "Got it." The boy's tone implied a threat, but Yoriichi simply acknowledged that he'd heard the words. Finally, the boy led them inside the house. The interior was of Western design with hinged doors rather than shoji. The door the demon boy knocked on was solid and he opened it to reveal a raised, Western-style bed and with the demon women sitting gracefully on a chair beside it. "I've returned, my lady," the boy announced. "I'm glad you made it," the woman said. Now that Yoriichi was up close and unoccupied, he could see her more clearly. The feeling of familiarity increased and he took an involuntary step towards her. It still wasn't coming back to him. Maybe if he got her to talk more. "I'm sorry I left everything for you to take care. How is she doing?" Yoriichi asked, indicating the woman on the bed. She was the woman who'd been bitten by the recently turned demon. Her face was burned into his memory. "She'll make a full recovery," the demon women said. Yoriichi relaxed slightly. "But her husband has to be locked up. He's restrained in the basement," the demon women continued. "It must be difficult treating humans," Yoriichi said. "All of that blood." The demon boy punched at Yoriichi's gut and missed. Yoriichi had seen his muscles tense and dodged in time. "Is that what you think?" the demon boy demanded. "That demons can't control themselves, so she is always choking back drool when she treats them." "My apologies, but it is a fair question. You two are different from any other demons I've met," Yoriichi said. His tone was polite, yet firm, and the words made the demon boy ball his hands into fists again. "Don't do that," the demon woman said, rising to her feet. "Do not resort to violence." The demon boy looked down, appearing ashamed. "Did I ever introduce myself?" the demon woman asked, looking at Yoriichi. "Apologies. My name is Tamayo and this is Yushiro. I hope you two can be friends." Tamayo. With a dizzying rush, Yoriichi's brain finally made the connection. He saw a girl watching his fight with Kibutsuji, her purple eyes bright and hopeful. Tears streamed from her eyes as she said Kibutsuji's name aloud. A tiny hand grasped his and shook, her soft voice promising to fight with him, to help him destroy Muzan Kibutsuji. "I didn't recognize her, because she was younger back then. She was just a demon kid traveling with Kibutsuji and I could tell she had no evil intentions. I spared her life." That had been one of the reasons the demon slayer corpse had banished Yoriichi. They already were suspicious after Mikatsu's betrayal, and letting Tamayo go seemed like a confirmation of Yoriichi's own traitorous status. The members of the Demon Slayer Corps simply didn't understand that not all demons were bloodthirsty monsters. A strange noise from Yushiro broke Yoriichi out of the past. He glanced at the demon boy to see that he was grinding his teeth and making a strange grumbling noise. "It's not all that difficult," Tamayo said, drawing Yoriichi's attention back to her. "Not for me, but it's different for other demons." For a moment, Yoriichi wasn't sure what she meant, then he realized she was answering his earlier question about the blood. "My body's physiology has gone through considerable changes and I have removed Kibutsuji's curse," Tamayo added. "What curse? What kind of changes?" Yoriichi asked. He knew Kibutsuji did something to the demons he created. It was why none of them ever turned on him successfully. What Kibutsuji did to them was unknown. "Come with me," Tamayo said, leading Yoriichi out of the room. The room she led them to was smaller, but more cozy, with a chair, desk, and several bookshelves. Woven tatami mats covered the floor. Nezuko happily flopped down on them and looked upwards towards the ceiling. Yoriichi glanced at Tamayo, but she seemed unbothered by the demon girl's casual attitude. She smiled down at Nezuko with a look of almost motherly fondness. Yushiro shot Nezuko a sharp look, but did not say anything. "Make yourselves at home," Tamayo said. "Now, as I was saying, I made several changes to our bodies so we could continue to live without having to harm humans. We survive on just a small amount of human blood." Yoriichi thought. She must have made Yushiro able to resist Kibutsuji too. "I know you must be disgusted by that, but I buy the blood from the poor. They are told it will be used for transfusions and never take enough from them to harm them," Tamayo continued. "That explains why their presence is gentler," Yoriichi thought. "It lacks the killing intent every other demon, but Nezuko has had up to this point. They still need blood, though, and Nezuko doesn't, so whatever way they found to resist is not the same as hers. Yushiro needs even less than I do since I am the one who turned him into a demon." "I don't follow," Yoriichi said. "Only Kibutsuji can create demons." "That's more or less accurate," Tamayo admitted. "It took me 200 years, and after everything, I only managed to transform Yushiro." 200 years, huh? Yoriichi said. "I never thought you'd be that old." His comment made Tamayo blink in surprise. Yoriichi had a moment to curse his fumbling tongue before he felt malicious intent close to him. He swayed to the side just in time to avoid a punch from Yushiro. "You know better than to ask a lady her age," Yushiro yelled, trying to nail Yoriichi in the stomach once more. "Yushiro," Tamayo said, "if you try to hit that boy again, I'll make you regret it." "Yes, ma'am," Yushiro said, suddenly going back to sitting with perfect posture. "Is creating more demons one of your goals?" Yoriichi asked. He had to know. If Tamayo intended on becoming a second Kibutsuji, he would kill her, here and now. Take back the second chance at life he had given her during his own first life. "I have no intention of creating more demons, and I only do so when necessary. The terminally ill or injured, and even then, I always ask in advance if they truly wish to live on as a demon." Yoriichi looked into Tamayo in the transparent world. He stretched his sixth sense as far as it would go when sensing another creature. No hint of deception or malice was present. Her presence here, at this time in his life, was heaven sent. Maybe it was some kind of repayment for letting her go in his first life. He had to trust her. He owed it to Nezuko. "This Tamayo, once someone becomes a demon, is there a way to turn them back again?" "A way to make a demon turn human again?" Tamayo said. "There is a way." Yoriichi's eyes widened. "Nezuko, Mikatsu, I could have them back. All of them." Yoriichi stood up and started to walk towards Tamayo. "Keep your distance from Lady Tamayo," Yushiro shouted. He tried to grab Yoriichi's wrist, but Yoriichi dodged before he even reached out his hand. Growling, Yushiro once more attempted to grab him. "Yushiro," Tamayo said, radiating disapproval at Yushiro. Stopping short like a dog brought to heel, Yushiro straightened up and looked at Tamayo. "I am sorry. I only tried to throw him. I wasn't going to hit him. Neither is acceptable. Be grateful he is so good at dodging," Tamayo said sternly. "Right," Yushiro exclaimed, ducking his head. Yoriichi sank to his knees and bowed to Tamayo. "Will you please tell me how?" Yoriichi said. "There is no need for that," Tamayo said, gesturing for Yoriichi to sit up. He did so slowly, watching her all the while. "Some kind of medicine or aid exists no matter the wound or ailment," Tamayo explained. "I do not know how to turn a human into a demon yet, but there must be a way." Looking down, Yoriichi tried not to let his disappointment show. He'd hoped that luck would be on his side for once, that Nezuko would be cured and Yoriichi could get the cure to Mikatsu eventually as well. She'd said yet though, so maybe. "I promise, we are going to find it," Tamayo stated. "We are dedicated to discovering such a treatment. To fulfill that end, I would like to ask you to do something for me." To discover the cure, I need to study the blood of several different demons, which means I have two favors to ask you. First, I would like permission to study your sister's blood. Second, I need more samples. Try to get blood from demons as closely related to Kibutsuji as possible. Nezuko's condition is extremely rare. It might be unique among demons. She was asleep for 2 straight years and I believe her body changed during that time. In most cases, without food, whether in the form of human flesh or some kind of animal, any demon would without a doubt grow violent. However, Tamayo's eyes strayed over to Nezuko, who was now curled up on the tatami mats. Against all odds, Nezuko is showing no signs of that. That miracle might be the key to finding a solution. Yoriichi looked down at Nezuko, who had closed her eyes and was holding one of his hands. To think that she might be the key to her own illness and maybe even to Mikatsu's in the end. My second request, however, is not a simple one. When I say demons as closely related to Kibutsuji as possible, I mean demons with power like Kibutsuji himself. Extracting blood from that type of demon will not be easy. What do you think? Is that kind of request acceptable, if not pleasant? Demons with power like Kibutsuji. She must mean members of the 12 Kazuki if that is the case. Yoriichi shuddered internally. The 12 Kazuki had come into existence after he was exiled from the corpse, shortly after Mikatsu was turned. He'd run into a couple times in his first life while searching for Mikatsu. While he'd been stronger than them in his old body, they'd given him more of a fight than any demon other than Kibutsuji had. The even bigger problem was how they were made. I don't have to kill them, right? Yoriichi asked. Tamayo blinked. No, a blood sample should be sufficient. Getting that without killing them, though, might be close to impossible. Why do you ask? I'll just have to be strong enough to do it without killing, Yoriichi thought. Seemed like taking it and running would be easier. He lied. They are much too fast for something like that to work, Tamayo stated. Oh, he said. If it really is the only way, I'll do it. If this works out and you make the medicine, other people could be saved too. She studied his face, but it must have been the same blank mask as always because she didn't seem to find anything. She smiled and agreed with him. Then Yoriichi's attention was caught by a sudden pricking at the edge of his awareness. 2 demonic presences, strong and filled with malevolence, were close by. He looked at the courtyard outside through the transparent world and spotted 2 demons entering through the hidden entrance in the wall. Is there another way out of here? Yoriichi asked, gripping the hilt of his sword. No, there is just the one entrance. Why? Do you have any place you can shelter? Yoriichi interrupted. Yushiro glared at him. Don't you dare. Tamayo held a hand up to silence him. What is it? What's wrong? 2 demons have just entered the courtyard. They are about to attack us, Yoriichi said. Yushiro scoffed. My barrier is perfect. How would you know anyway? I can smell them from here, Yoriichi lied. They smell like blood and death. Yushiro eyed him suspiciously, but Tamayo appeared to accept what he was saying. We have a basement. It is the strongest place in the house, she said. Head Yoriichi began and then stopped and shouted, Duck. Yushiro's eyes widened. He and Tamayo both dropped to the floor. Yushiro crouched over Tamayo, shielding her. A multicolored tamari ball shot through the side of the house, leave a large jagged hole behind it. The toy whistled with deadly motion as it bounced around the room, putting craters into the walls. A second one entered behind it and bounced around as well before they both smashed back through the wall, creating a hole large enough for a person or demon to walk through. They all looked out of the hole to see the balls returning to the waiting palms of a demon girl with black hair with orange types and slit-pupiled yellow eyes wide with delight. Beside her stood a boy with short black hair and eyes in the center of his hands. Boy grinned as the girl announced, I have decided we will kill them ruthlessly. What is this? The boy said, stepping forward. I thought we were tracking down a demon slayer. Is he with demons? And Sumari, stop splashing my kimono with dust. Quit whining. The real fun is starting. Come out wherever you are, the girl said, pulling back her hand to throw again. The tamaris hit the walls, making the dust cloud obscuring Yoriichi, Nezuko, Yushiro, and Tamayo larger. Yoriichi pushed Nezuko behind him and drew his katana. Before he could act, the girl caught her tamaris and threw again, this time into the room once more. The tamaris bounced in a random but deadly pattern. One started to head for Tamayo and Yushiro tried to swat it away. The ball paused in midair and then dodged around him, hands to hit his head with enough to make it explode. Nezuko, get the lady sleeping in the back room to the basement, Yoriichi said. He crouched and readied himself to leap out the gap. Nezuko nodded and ran into the destroyed house. Miss Tamayo, get down in the basement where it is safe. No, Tanjiro, there is no need to worry about me. Focus on the fight. We will be just fine without your protection. We are demons too. Yoriichi hesitated for a moment and then nodded. He had to trust that she knew what she was doing. The Tamaris flew through the doorway and back towards the girl. Yoriichi charged through the dust cloud alongside them and swung his sword at the surprised girl. His sword took her right arm off at the elbow. He whirled to face her, sword raised. "You know, that kind of hurt," the girl growled, and then she laughed. "There is a demon slayer who wearing Hanafuda earrings. That would happen to be you, right?" Yoriichi froze. Did Kibutsuji remember him? Were these two sent to kill him? "Alrighty then. It is all over for you," the girl yelled. She used her newly regenerated arm to throw a temari at his face. The ball whistled towards him with deadly intent. Yoriichi watched it through the transparent world and saw ripples of aura around it. If he dodged and hit one, it would react like it had with Yushiro. The best response was simply to stab it. He brought his sword up in front of him and thrust forward, quickly like a striking snake. The temari spit itself on his blade and then began to wiggle free. Yoriichi flung his blade to the side and swung through the temari from the side. The blade cut itself free and the temari flew back to the girl. Before it reached her, it dispersed. An angry cry came from the house and Yoriichi looked past the girl to see Yushiro's head reforming. He started lecturing Tamayo about numbers and Kibutsuji and how she should never have gotten involved with a demon slayer. Yoriichi wasn't listening, though, because at that moment, the temari demon had shrugged off her Haori and half of her kimono. 4 extra arms grew around the first set of arms. Temaris appeared in each hand and she began to bounce them. "You are about to be killed by one of the 12 Kazuki. Doesn't that make you feel special?" the girl cried. 12 Kazuki, Yoriichi echoed. He didn't remember this one and she felt nothing like the others he'd seen his past life. Had they all died? Maybe that was why Kibutsuji hadn't sent him. The 12 Kazuki served directly under Kibutsuji, Tamayo explained, mistaking his words for a question. "I see," Yoriichi said. "What's with that face?" the temari demon said. "I asked if you felt special and you just look bored." "I don't feel special," Yoriichi answered flatly. "You don't look scared or happy either," the temari demon noted. "What a downer. Demon slayers like you are the ones I hate the most." She laughed again. "Let the games continue until morning comes and you are all dead," she exclaimed, throwing all 6 tamaris. 3 of them were aimed at Yoriichi. The other 3 flew into the already ruined house to attack Tamayo and Yushiro. Yoriichi sliced through all 3 attacking tamaris with 2 quick slashes and then leaped over the temari demon. Right before he landed, 6 temari halves slammed into him with enough force to bruise, but not break him. Cutting them in half, halves the force, Yoriichi surmised as he ran towards the house. Inside, he could see Yushiro crouching protectively over Tamayo. One of the temari bounced past his face, leaving a small cut behind. Yoriichi sliced a temari bouncing past into quarters and then whirled to do the same to another, closing on his back. As he quartered the third, 8 temari fragments hit him with barely enough force to hurt. Cutting them into pieces is effective, Yoriichi thought. But she can throw a lot with this 6 arms and regenerate as many of them as she needs. Eventually, I won't be fast enough and then she'll blow a hole through me. Turning, Yoriichi saw more tamaris appearing in the demon girl's hands. His eyes fell on the demon boy hidden in the trees, the one with eyes in the palms of his hands. He focused on him in the transparent world and saw strings of his aura connecting to the tamaris as the girl regenerated them. They are working together, Yoriichi realized. Her power lets her create the temari and throw them while his makes sure we can't dodge. Facing 2 demons this coordinated is bad, but it also means Yoriichi readied himself to charge. That taking down one will make the other easier to kill. Before he could move, the temari demon sent in 6 fresh tamaris. Yoriichi managed to cut them all into fourths again, only for 6 more to take their places. "You don't have time to cut them all up like that," Yushiro yelled. "The arrows are the key. Follow them and you'll know where the tamaris will go." "The arrows?" Yoriichi asked. "You mean you can't see them?" Yushiro asked, exasperated. "Fine, I'll lend you my sight for now. You should be able to use it to get the temari woman at least." A scrap of paper flew towards Yushiro's forehead and stuck. Suddenly, in addition to the threads of demonic energy in the transparent world, he could now see red arrows attached to each of the tamaris. A benign demon presence appeared and Nezuko came into view. "Follow me outside," Yoriichi told her. "Take care of the one in the tree." Then he ran forward. Using the arrows, he was able to dodge through the tamaris and burst out into the open. Nezuko leaped over him, headed for the tree. The temari demon's eyes widened and she threw 2 newly materialized tamaris at him. Yoriichi used the arrows to predict their paths and quarter them in half a second. It was just long enough for her to materialize 4 more tamaris and hurl them at him, forcing him to dodge away from her. "You came here for me," Yoriichi said. "Leave them out of it." "You are the demon slayer with Hanafuda earrings," the girl confirmed. "I'm going to take off your head and bring it to him." She grinned and her arms bulged as her palms filled with temari. This is so much fun. As she laughed, Yoriichi imagined what her laugh sounded like before she began a demon. He thought it might have sounded sweeter, a bit more pure. For Kibutsuji to take a child like her and turn into a monster, it made Yoriichi furious and sad at the same time. "What's with that look in your eyes?" the demon girl asked. Her smile fell off her face. "Take it back. I don't ever want to get a look like that. Never again." The Tamaris flew at him with renewed force. Yoriichi ducked, twisted, and ran into all six were chasing him in a cluster and then slashed through them in the blink of an eye. The pieces gently whacked into him and disintegrated. He shot a quick glance at the trees. Hopefully Nezuko would find the demon boy soon. "You don't get to look at me like that," the demon girl said as Yoriichi approached her again. "Like I am someone to be pitied, to be looked down. You're the one about to die. Save your pity for yourself." She threw again, but this time, the arrows disappeared before they were halfway to Yoriichi. He used a water-breathing move to throw them all in one easy movement and then sliced all six of the Temari demon's arms off. "Miss Tamayo, are she and the boy closely related to Kibutsuji?" Yoriichi asked. Tamayo came to the door, her bun half fallen down and face bloody from where one Temari had hit her. "Possibly. I'll get you your first blood samples tonight then," Yoriichi said. "You really think you can blood from us?" the Temari girl asked, giving him a toothy smile. "I don't know why you want it. You can try, but there is no chance I'll let you do anything that will displease him." Her mood seemed to have gone back to cheerful, or at least the sadistic approximation of cheerful it had been earlier. How like a child she still was, quick to offense and quick to laugh. "If you really think you can take blood from one of the 12 Kazuki, you are welcome to try," she shouted. "Don't let your guard down, Tanjiro. If she really is one of the 12 Kazuki, then she is powerful. Don't underestimate them because they are more powerful than any other demon you have faced before," Yushiro said. Again, Yoriichi looked at her and got the sense that something was not right. He decided to take a gamble, see if that would get him some information. "You are not one of the 12 Kazuki," Yoriichi stated flatly. "Oh," she sneered. "What makes you think that I'm not? Think I'm not strong enough? Your powers are dangerous, but not dangerous enough," Yoriichi replied. A vein bulged in the girl's forehead. "Did you just call me a weakling? You're dead, Hanafuda boy. You also weren't a." Yoriichi stopped himself. "Fully grown woman by the time he turned you. I think it unlikely he'd make a child into one of the 12 Kazuki." "A child?" the girl asked, and then she laughed again. "I might seem like a child to you, but I am not. I am stronger than you will ever be." A shadow fell over Yoriichi and he felt the demonic presence in the trees move. Yoriichi leaped up and caught Nezuko in his arms, gently lowered her down to the ground. The demon boy landed next to the Temari girl shortly after that. He smiled and raised a palm, menacingly. "Both of you can die together," the Temari girl shouted, throwing one of her Tamaris at top speed. Yoriichi's arms were filled with Nezuko, so he jumped out of the way. Quickly, he set Nezuko down and raised his sword in a guard. "Hey, Demon Slayer," Yushiro yelled. "Let the rest of us take care of the Temari woman. Take care of the arrow guy." Yoriichi nodded to show his understanding and stood up. Nezuko stood up alongside him. "Be careful," he told her. She charged towards the Temari girl while he dashed towards the demon boy. "You're filthy," the demon boy said critically. "Don't come anywhere near me." An arrow shot out from one of his hands and skittered under Yoriichi's feet, sending him flying backwards. Yoriichi saw another arrow angling towards him from the left and spotted the tree it was going to crash him into. Quickly Yoriichi oriented himself so he slammed into the tree with his feet rather than his back and sprang at the boy again. Unfortunately, more arrows crossed his path, forcing Yoriichi to duck, twist, and sidestep. The maze of arrows led him further away from the demon boy. He was managing to dodge the arrows. Without a way to block the arrows, though, he wasn't getting anywhere near his target. The arrows weren't disappearing either, so he had an increasing number of them following him. He heard a grunt from the Temari woman and the Yushiro yelling about them hurting Tamayo. This had the unexpected effect of making both demons pause. "Can you believe our luck, Suzumaru?" the demon boy asked. "We found Tamayo the fugitive. She'll make quite a souvenir," the Temari girl agreed. Yoriichi took advantage of the lull to run another few feet closer. The demon boy soon stopped him with more arrows to dodge. But progress was progress. He couldn't keep dodging. If he wanted to slice off the demon boy's head, he needed to close in. If only he had the same speed as in First Life, he could dash past any arrow's throw and simply slice the demon's head off. Suddenly, a memory popped into his head. He'd tried to lift his father's axe so he could help his father make the charcoal by chopping wood. The blade was heavy though, and Yoriichi's small 4-year-old hands weren't strong enough. By the time his mother had found him, Yoriichi's hands were scraped painfully raw and covered in blisters. "Why aren't I strong enough?" he asked as his mother gently spread a herbal salve over his hands. "Why can't I help, Papa?" His mother had smiled at him and cupped one of his cheeks. "Focus on what you have, Tanjiro, not what you don't. You are as strong as you need to be." Now these words echoed in Yoriichi's mind, and with them came an idea. He was having issues because he was resisting the arrows. What if he followed them? Quickly, he scanned the arrows coming at him, tracing a pattern. He dodged 3 arrows in quick succession and then let one swooping to the right hit him. He flew into the air with the other arrows still following him. Lashing out in a water-breathing move, he touched an arrow that set him backwards and rode it into an arrow headed left. All of this happened fast, too fast for the demon boy to understand what was happening. He was laughing and talking about how everything was going to plan when Yoriichi rode one of his arrows in from the side and sliced through his neck with a water wheel move. The demon's eyes widened as his head flew off. Yoriichi had successfully used the demon's own arrows to create an attack pattern and up his own speed and power. "You brat, how could you do this to me?" the demon's head yelled from the ground. "I just needed to bring him your head and I would have finally won his approval. Now my face is filthy from you shoving it into the dirt. I swear that you will die with me." The demon pointed both of his hands with their eyes and tried to aim that at Yoriichi. Yoriichi, however, was no longer there. He'd leaped into the air and was now behind the demon's body, holding both hands down into the dirt. "I don't know how his blood demon art works," Yoriichi thought, "but he needs to look at me with those eyes and his hands to aim. If he can't use his hands, he can't hit me." The demon boy opened his mouth, no doubt to scream more curses and obscenities, but Yoriichi cut him off. "I'm sorry for your loss," Yoriichi said. That stopped the demon boy dead. "Huh. In this life, the monsters took everything from. I hope that in your next, they will never find. Do you have a screw loose or something? No one took anything from me. I wanted this. I wanted power. I wanted to be." The demon began and then stopped. "I wanted to be seen," he finally said. His voice was a whisper now. His jaw was starting to disintegrate. For someone to see, the rest of his words were cut off as his head finished dissolving. Yoriichi let go of the body and bowed his head. "You are seen," Yoriichi said quietly, "and you are mourned." Then he put his sword into a guard and headed off to find Nezuko and the Temari girl. "He's a coward," Tamayo's voice said from around the corner. "Surely, you've realized that. He's in a constant state of fear. How dare you?" "Shut up," the Temari girl's voice said. Yoriichi peered over the edge of the house to see her standing against a cratered wall, Tamaris in all 6 hands. "Do you want to know why no demons can ever group together or why they cannibalize their own kind?" Tamayo went on. "It's because he doesn't want us to group up. He fears we would attack him if we could." The thought made Yoriichi pause. He'd never thought of Kibutsuji quite the way. Then again, he'd never really known much about the Demon King beyond his clever, sadistic plots and lust for immortality. The picture Tamayo was painting made sense, though. He'd seen fear in those eyes in his first life, but not the same fear as in other demons he killed. Now he understood. It was old, familiar fear, the kind of face a child makes when a recurring nightmare suddenly becomes reality. Just then, he noticed something odd about Tamayo's aura. Yoriichi saw it spilling down from one hand and then turning into mist. She was keeping the Temari girl talking. "Give her spell time to work. He manipulates demons to make them behave," Tamayo finished. "Demons like you." The Temari girl glared at Tamayo. "Shut up. He has no reason to be so petty," the Temari girl shouted. But Yoriichi could see the doubt she was frantically fighting in her eyes and in the quick beats of her heart. Tamayo's words had the ring of truth to them. Not even the demon girl could dismiss them as lies. "You cannot even comprehend the power he wields," the Temari girl ranted. "No one is stronger than him, not Lord Kibutsuji." Yoriichi winced and Tamayo gave the Temari girl a sad smile. The girl's top's 2 hands flew up to her mouth to cover it. "You have activated the curse," Tamayo said. "Farewell." The Temari girl ran, begging Kibutsuji for forgiveness as she fled. Ever additional repetition of the Demon King's name made Yoriichi flinch. Her death was not going to be painless. As she began to cry like the child she must have once been, 3 gigantic arms burst from her body in a spray of blood. One of them reached up to her head and squeezed it until it exploded in a splatter of gore. The arms tore at her body until it was ripped into pieces strewn on the ground. Yushiro looked like he was about to be sick and Nezuko's eyes were wide. Tamayo simply looked tired. Yoriichi approached the group and gave Tamayo a respectful nod. "The arrow demon?" Tamayo asked. "Dead," Yoriichi replied. He looked down at the Temari girl. "She will be dead soon. Kibutsuji's curse will use the cells he left in her to rip her body apart still further from the inside." Tamayo crouched by the body. Battles between demons are generally pointless. Only sunlight or the sword of a demon slayer can kill a demon. The only exception is Kibutsuji. He is the only one who can destroy a demon's cells. Yushiro ran up to Yoriichi and shoved a cloth over his nose. Lady Tamayo's spell is too powerful. You'll die if you breathe it in, Yushiro said. For a moment, Yoriichi was confused and then he remembered that he'd said something about an enhanced sense of smell. He took the cloth and pressed it to his own nose. You could at least look grateful, Yushiro said, scowling. Thank you, Yoriichi said. You don't even sound like you mean it, Yushiro snapped. Tanjiro, Tamayo said. You were right. This isn't one of the 12 Kazuki. She pointed to one of the girl's eyes. The 12 Kazuki all have numbers engraved on their eyeballs. She doesn't have one. The other demon most likely doesn't either. They were too weak. Even though Yoriichi had guessed as much, he took a moment to consider that. If these weren't 12 Kazuki, Kibutsuji wasn't aware Yoriichi was alive again. He wouldn't send anything less than Upper Moon because Kibutsuji would know there would be no point. Their chance meeting and Yoriichi's own impulsive actions hadn't been so disastrous after all. I am curious, how did you know that they were not from the 12 Kazuki? Tamayo asked. They were children, Yoriichi responded. And that is the only reason. She asking, raised a pencil-thin eyebrow. Yoriichi hadn't known about the eyeballs. It was a practice Kibutsuji must have begun later. No, there had been another sign. One only he knew about. Yes, it was, Yoriichi lied. Tamayo examined his face for a moment and then said, I guess it was pure luck then. Keep in mind that when a human becomes a demon, they stay the age they were when they were turned most of the time. Even a child could be one of the 12 Kazuki. Yoriichi nodded his understanding. He did partially agree with her. 12 Kazuki members could be children, at least the lower moons could be. Yushiro started to talk about how foolish the girl was for thinking she could best Tamayo. Yoriichi watched as Tamayo took a syringe full of blood from the girl's corpse and put it in a box. Yushiro stopped talking when Tamayo expressed her hope that it would be useful. Tamayo then said something about Nezuko inhaling the spell and needing help. Yoriichi glanced at Nezuko where she sat against the ruined wall of the house through the transparent world and saw her heart beating slowly, but strongly. She was tired, nothing more. So when Tamayo left to take care of Nezuko with Yushiro following behind her, saying something about not leaving her side, Yoriichi stayed behind to look at the remains of the demon. It sickened him to see the life still flowing through her veins. Kibutsuji hadn't been content with simply tearing the girl apart. He wanted her to burn in the sunlight as well. Without her head and neck intact, Yoriichi could do nothing to ease her passing. Mary, her choked voice managed to say, Mary. It took Yoriichi a moment to realize she was asking for her temari. One of them had fallen onto the ground nearby and stayed whole. Slowly, Yoriichi rolled it towards her. The bell inside it tickled merrily. Play with me, she said. I'm sorry it had to end this way, child. May you be reborn into a kinder world where monsters do not prey on children like you, Yoriichi said. The sun came up and Yoriichi heard a sigh from the clothes as the rest of the demon crumbled to ash. Turning away, he entered the ruined house. A quick glance was all he needed to see her in the basement with Tamayo and Yushiro. Whereover Yushiro started to say as he turned the corner. How did you find us? Yushiro demanded. With my nose, Yoriichi lied. Yushiro made a face. Don't do that. It's creepy. Just ask for help like a normal person. Nezuko ran to Yoriichi and gave him a hug. He smiled and hugged her back, glad to see she'd made it through the fight unharmed. I thought it best to get us all down to the basement before daybreak. Sunlight can't reach us here, Tamayo informed Yoriichi. At the sound of her voice, Nezuko turned and raced towards her. She flung her arms around Tamayo with an audible gasp from Yushiro. Tamayo's eyes widened in surprise and Yushiro started yelling about how rude Nezuko was being. Tamayo seemed unconcerned, though. Calm down, Yushiro. I don't mind at all, she said. Yushiro immediately backed down and gave Tamayo an adoring look. Then Nezuko looked at Yushiro and rubbed the top of his head gently. He gave a squawk of protest. It's strange, Tamayo said. She's been acting like this since she woke up. I wonder if she is all right. She's fine, Yoriichi said, approaching the group. She thinks of you family. Us as family, Tamayo asked. But doesn't the spell Nezuko is under only make her think of humans as family? Yushiro and I are demons. To Nezuko, you two are as human as anyone to her. She wanted to protect you, Yoriichi explained. I wasn't sure I liked the idea of messing with her mind like that. But she still has her own will. A tear fell from one of Tamayo's eyes. Crap, Yoriichi thought. I've messed up again. Read the situation entirely wrong. Why couldn't social situations be like demon hunting? He always knew what to do then. I am sorry, Yoriichi said, bowing. Tamayo, however, buried her face in Nezuko's shoulder and said thank you. Thank you so much, Nezuko. No one has ever treated us as human before. Nezuko finally let go of Tamayo and headed back to Yoriichi. Yushiro and I will be leaving this area, Tamayo said. We're too close to Kibutsuji here. It's too risky to stay here and we need a new place to hide. Besides, while I think I have hidden my identity, after treating so many humans, some of them have likely figured out I'm a demon. Both children and the elderly are especially perceptive. So Tanjiro, yes, Yoriichi said. To protect Nezuko, would you like us to take her with us when we go? Yoriichi blinked, surprised by the question. Yushiro started shaking his head and desperately motioning for Tamayo to take it back. For a moment, Yoriichi was tempted. Having one of his siblings safe and away from the conflict would ease his mind. Then he thought about how Nezuko had fought with him. She wasn't a delicate flower in need of protecting. If she could speak, she wouldn't thank him for making her leave him. As if sensing his thoughts, Nezuko took his hand and gave him a determined look. Even without speaking, she'd made it clear what she wanted. Together, they turned back to Tamayo. Miss Tamayo, thank you for your concern, but Nezuko is staying with me. I will not let anything break us apart. Yes, I understand. I wish you good fortune then, Tamayo said. All right, Yushiro said. We will be leaving as soon as we cover our tracks. You should get moving as well. Yoriichi nodded. Thank you for everything you've done for us. He started to turn away and then hesitated. She'd known him before, from his first life. Could she help him get back to that full strength faster? Did he dare trust her with the truth? In the end, he decided not to try. If there was even a fraction of chance Kibutsuji could still hear or occasionally see things through her or Yushiro like he could other demons, Yoriichi couldn't risk it. For his sake, Nezuko's, and Michikatsu's. Nezuko, let's go, Yoriichi said. Nezuko nodded and then sprinted up the steps from the basement. Yoriichi started to follow her, but Yushiro called out to him to stop. Your little sister, Yushiro said with his head turned away. I guess she is a beauty. Recognizing it for the olive branch it was, Yoriichi dipped his head. Thank you, he said. He found the box Urokodaki had made and Nezuko climbed into it. They left without a backwards glance. You know, Tamayo mused aloud once they had left. Something about Tanjiro seemed familiar, like I might have met him before somehow. For his part, Yushiro hoped that was the last they'd ever see of the boy. He was creepy and had no business being around saintly Lady Tamayo. The two of them were out on the road when Yoriichi's Kasugai crow caught up. South, southeast, the crow barked. South, southeast. The next place you need to go is south, southeast. Yoriichi kept walking. Can you even hear me? The bird demanded. Yoriichi looked up and nodded. The bird sighed and wondered why it had to be assigned to such an expressionless human. The sound of begging reached Yoriichi's ears. His hand went to his sword and he dashed ahead until he found the source of the noise. The boy from Final Selection with the yellow hair was on his knees, clutching a girl on the shoulders and begging her to marry him. The sight filled Yoriichi with dread. Why couldn't it have been another demon instead? Why did the world persist in handing him complicated social situations? As Yoriichi stood there, unsure if he should apologize, tear the other demon slayer off, and run for it, or both, a chittering sparrow came to his rescue. The sparrow landed on Yoriichi's hand and began to explain the situation in rapid-fire chirps. In his past life, Yoriichi had enjoyed being around animals. When on the road for missions, he had frequently leave little offerings of food for the birds and other animals. They seemed to approve him too because they frequently came up to him for attention. The animals were easy to understand too, so much more straightforward than people. His second life, it seemed, was much the same. He could understand everything the sparrow was saying to him even though it didn't speak in a human language like his Kasugai crow did. Yoriichi nodded as the situation became clear to him. I'll help him, Yoriichi explained. The sparrow trilled in delight and nuzzled its head against his fingers. Yoriichi grabbed the back of the crying demon slayer's Haori and yanked, flipping him over his head and onto the road. The other boy lay staring up at him, eyes wide. He was winded from the fall, but unharmed, Yoriichi noted. Stop, Yoriichi said. He started to say more, but the boy's eyes abruptly rolled up into his head and he passed out. Blinking, Yoriichi looked down at his fellow demon slayer. I didn't throw him that hard, did I? He thought. Examining the boy in the transparent world, Yoriichi saw that the boy's heart was beating abnormally fast and his lungs were drawing in quick short breaths, but there was no sign of broken bones. He must have passed out from terror. Yoriichi looked up at the girl. I apologize for his behavior. Are you hurt? No, but that boy was creepy. Who goes around asking any girl he sees to marry them? The girl asked indignantly. Yoriichi didn't know how to answer that question. He suspected it was one of those questions that people weren't meant to answer, but wasn't sure. If he were still awake, I'd give him a good slapping, the girl said. Bowing, Yoriichi said, I cannot allow that. If you need help with anything else, I would be happy to do it. No thanks, the girl said, squinting at him. You are polite, but you are also a bit odd. I think I'll head home now before I run into any more weirdos. Mentally, Yoriichi winced at being included in that category. The girl turned around, her twin braids whirling, and stomped down one of the paths. The sparrow landed on Yoriichi's shoulder and chirped loudly in his ear. Sorry, I didn't know what else to do, he apologized. The sparrow tilted its head and then seemed to accept that explanation. Yoriichi looked down at the fallen boy. He didn't seem like he was going to wake up anytime soon. Sighing, Yoriichi slung him over one shoulder and kept heading down the road, now laden with a demon slayer, a box, and a demon. An hour or so later, according to the sun, Yoriichi felt the boy's breathing change. He carefully set the boy's back against a tree and waited. The boy opened one eye and then screamed when he saw Yoriichi. I am not going to hurt you, Yoriichi said. Yeah, right, the boy shouted. You sounded like a hurricane and wildfire mixed together. No one sounds like that and has good intentions. The words confused Yoriichi. You have my word. I will not harm you, he repeated. Strangely, the boy relaxed at those words. You sound like you're telling the truth. But I haven't forgotten what you did to that boy at final selection. That was an extreme situation, Yoriichi admitted. Why did you have to get in my way? The boy whined. It had nothing to do with you. Yoriichi's expression didn't show it, but he felt a brief flicker of anger at the question. Couldn't the boy see that girl hadn't wanted anything to do with him? There it is again, the boy shrieked, clapping a hand over his ears. The howling wind, the buzzing heat. You're going to murder me. I won't hurt you, Yoriichi repeated. The boy slowly lowered his hands from his ears and stopped crying. You were scaring her, Yoriichi said simply. That's why I stopped you. No. She was madly in love with me. The boy shouted. What did her heart sound like? Yoriichi asked. The boy blinked. Her heart. Tilting his head, he thought for a moment. It was beating kind of fast. That was because she liked me, right? Yoriichi shook his head. She was afraid. The boy lowered his head and looked ashamed for a moment. I see, he said. Satisfied, Yoriichi picked up Nezuko's box from where he had left it and started to walk away. Where are you going? The boy demanded. Yoriichi didn't reply. The boy had his sword with him and it was broad daylight. He'd be fine on his own. You realize it was your fault that I missed out on getting married, right? That means you have to protect me until I get married. I'll die on my next job without you. I am super weak. That didn't quite match up with what Yoriichi had seen at final selection. The boy had come out of that with no major injuries and hadn't ever had to be rescued. Then there were his lungs, powerful, though in need of more conditioning to expand them. His muscles too were lean, but tough. There should be no issue if he left the boy behind. Say something, the boy demanded, getting in front of Yoriichi and peering into his face. Don't just look at me with that stupid blank expression. Yoriichi should have stepped around him and kept moving. Instead he found himself asking, What's your name? Zenitsu Agatsuma, the boy cried, grabbing onto Yoriichi's knees. And yours? Tanjiro Komado, Yoriichi replied. Save me, Tanjiro, the boy pleaded. Yoriichi tried to walk again, but it was too late for that. Zenitsu kept following him, keeping up a steady stream of complaints the whole way. Fortunately, Yoriichi was practiced at keeping quiet while a loud-mouthed companion constantly chattered away. Before long, Yoriichi knew many things about Zenitsu Agatsuma, why he had joined the Demon Slayer Corps, his hopes for the future, and his biggest fears. After a while, Zenitsu finally calmed down enough to walk beside Yoriichi quietly. Tears stood out on his cheeks, but his breathing was more even and his heart beat more slowly. Looking overhead, Yoriichi saw that it was about noon. He pulled out a rice ball. He expected Zenitsu to take out his own food, but the boy just looked away. Here, Yoriichi said, handing it to Zenitsu. Thank you so much, the boy mumbled, taking it and biting into it. He stopped when he noticed Yoriichi wasn't pulling another one out. You going to eat anything? Yoriichi shrugged. That was all the food I had. Zenitsu looked down for a moment and there was a guilty tinge to his presence. For his part, Yoriichi had no issue. He was used to going hungry sometimes. In his previous life, he'd been hungry plenty when he ran away from home. As Tanjiro, he'd sacrificed at times to let his younger siblings eat. Here, Zenitsu said, holding out half of the rice ball. Yoriichi took it with thanks and the two ate in silence. I don't really get you, Zenitsu said finally. You obviously don't like me and yet you were going to give me the only food you had on you. You seemed like you were hungry, Yoriichi replied. But you don't know and you don't seem to like me. I like you fine, Yoriichi said. I wish you wouldn't bother random girls and get so anxious you worry your sparrow, but that doesn't mean I don't like you. My sparrow? Zenitsu asked, surprised. It was worried. Yoriichi nodded. Said sparrow cheaped from the palm of Yoriichi's hand. He wishes you would stop hitting on girls, stop whining about going to work, and snore less loudly, Yoriichi affirmed. Zenitsu's eyes widened as he looked at the bird. He said all that. The sparrow chirped its agreement and bobbed its head. Wait, you can speak bird language? You're kidding me. Yoriichi simply looked at him. With that blank face, I totally can't tell if you are lying or not, Zenitsu complained. They were interrupted by a loud cough from above. Start running, the crow cawed. Run, Tanjiro, run, Zenitsu. Yoriichi's hand went to the hilt of his sword. Was the crow warning him there was a demon around? He didn't sense anything like that. You must head to your next destination, the crow added and then repeated his instructions. Relaxing, Yoriichi took his hand off his sword. Zenitsu, however, stared up the crow with horror in his eyes. That crow is talking to us, he shrieked. It's a Kasugai crow, Yoriichi said. So, Zenitsu demanded. For a moment, Yoriichi just looked at him. Had no one bothered to explain what Kasugai crows were to him? They're from the Demon Slayer Corps, Yoriichi added. Wait, they're demons, Zenitsu shrieked. Specially trained, Yoriichi replied. He set off again, following the crow. Zenitsu whined, sniffled, and then followed after him. You'll protect me, right? He asked. Civilians first, Yoriichi said. What? Zenitsu shouted, waving his arms in a panic. Civilians and then fellow demon slayers, Yoriichi said. Zenitsu opened his mouth, probably to shriek or beg, but Yoriichi held up a hand. We don't know how close we are to the demon, he said. Zenitsu's mouth slammed shut and his eyes went wide. He followed directly behind Yoriichi, peeking out from behind the other boy nervously at intervals. Technically, the silence was unnecessary. Yoriichi would probably sense any demons long before they were in hearing range. But demons with enhanced hearing existed, and it was possible one had been born in the intervening years between his two lives that could conceal itself from him. The two were in the middle of a forest when a dark mass of energy registered in Yoriichi's mind. In terms of the demons he had met before, this one had the Temari demon and the Arrow demon beat for power. He tensed for a moment, his hand drifting to his sword hilt. Tanjiro, Zenitsu asked nervously. What is going on? Yoriichi relaxed. The demon was still a ways away yet and he would feel if it starting coming towards them. No need to get battle ready just yet. He continued forward with Zenitsu trailing nervously behind. While he expected another question or a whine from Zenitsu, the other boy was silent. His footfalls became softer, as if he was trying to blend in with the sounds of the forest. Yoriichi's hearing was better than most people's and he could barely hear Zenitsu. A mansion with several stories came into view through the trees. It sat in a large clearing. The walls had dull, slightly faded paint, but they were clean. The shoji and front door were whole, if a little worn. If not for the dark presence sticking out in the middle of it like an ugly boil, Yoriichi might have thought it an ordinary house. I don't like this, Zenitsu said. There is a strange sound. You can hear it, right? Yoriichi paused and then felt two small, light presences. He turned to see a boy in a blue haori and a girl in a pink kimono huddled at the edge of the clearing the house was in. Their eyes were wide and glassy with shock and fear. Why are there kids here? Yoriichi started forward and the kids closed their eyes, squeezing one another tight. Somehow, he was scaring them. Hey, he said awkwardly, what are you doing out here by yourselves? The girl opened one eye and looked at him. Yoriichi thought about smiling for a moment but doubted it would look right. None of his smiles had since he'd woken up in his second life. He settled for looking relaxed and keeping his hands away from his sword hilt. The girl shut her eyes again. It wasn't working. Desperate now, Yoriichi looked around for inspiration. What had he done when Rokita was afraid? Find a cool rock sometimes or maybe a bug if it wasn't winter. Did the forest have anything like that? Yoriichi's eyes landed on the sparrow on his shoulder and he awkwardly placed it on his outspread hand to hold out to the children. Do you like sparrows? He asked. The children opened their eyes and just stared at him for a minute. He could feel Zenitsu behind him also looking at him like was insane. Then the girl reached out hesitantly and stroked a finger along the sparrow's back. It leaned into her touch, preening at the attention. The girl gave a watery smile and relaxed. The boy let out a breath and let one hand drop from his sister, though the other stayed tightly clasped in one of her hands. Can you tell what happened? Yoriichi asked. Is this your home? The boy shook his head and stammered out that it belonged to a monster. Our big brother got taken away when we were walking out on the road at night. This thing appeared in front of us and went straight for our brother. It never even looked at us. Is your brother in that house? The girl started to cry and the boy gave a jerky nod. We used his blood to follow them. That thing really hurt him. That was brave of you, Yoriichi said. My companion and I will kill the monster. Your brother will be returned shortly. Is that true? The girl asked, eyes wide. You'll save him. I promise, Yoriichi said. No one should have to lose a brother. A rare natural smile crossed his lips then, but it was sad and slightly mournful. It wasn't a comforting expression. The girl still smiled back and wiped tears from her eyes. "Hey Tanjiro, what is that strange sound?" Zenitsu asked. He sounded frightened and a little dazed. "It is really unnerving and sounds like the beating of a drum. It never stops." Turning to look at the house, Yoriichi focused. It was faint, but he could hear it. Pounding beats rising and falling, like a living heartbeat. The presence was moving in a strange way too. But how? A rapid tattoo broke through Yoriichi's thoughts and then the shoji ripped open. A boy with bloodied and torn clothes, dark hair matted with more blood flew out and began to drop towards the ground. Yoriichi didn't waste time thinking. He leaped and caught the boy in his arms. Landing on the ground, he gently put the boy down and examined him through the transparent world. The stomach had a large hole in it and the heartbeat was irregular. The boy was alive, but wouldn't be for long. The boy coughed and gasped. "Even though I escaped from that place am I still going to die? Was it not enough? Look at the sun and the bright blue sky," Yoriichi said softly. "Wouldn't you rather die here than in a place like that?" The boy shivered and looked at him through glassy eyes, then said, "The sun. I like the sun." In the next instant, he was gone. Reverently, Yoriichi reached out and shut the boy's eyes. "Tanjiro, would that happen to be these kids?" Zenitsu began. Mercifully, the house shook and drowned out the rest of his words. The kids screamed and Zenitsu stared, horror-struck. Yoriichi stood up, his face in its usual expressionless mask. He didn't want to ask the question, but had no choice. "Is this your brother?" "No," the boy said, eyes tightly shut as he shielded his sister. He was wearing an orange kimono. It captures more than one person at a time then, Yoriichi thought. More powerful demons do that at times to fill their appetites. There are more people we can save then. Help came too late for this one. He looked down at the boy's corpse, but not for the others. "It's time, Zenitsu," he said. The terrified boy shook his head back and forth like a wobbly top. "If you want to stay behind then fine, but you are a demon slayer. Think about what that means to you," Yoriichi said. He took the box off his shoulders and set it underneath the tree by the children. Zenitsu wailed something about Yoriichi's words and hurricanes and burning, but tearfully agreed to follow Yoriichi. "This box will protect you," Yoriichi said. "Stay nearby it. We will be back." He headed straight for the house, a quietly sniveling Zenitsu following behind him. The door had opened slightly when the house shook and stood ajar. Yoriichi pushed it open the rest of the way and looked down a dark hallway, empty except for several empty clay pots and wooden lids. Further in, a flickering lantern hung from the ceiling, casting a dim illumination. "Tanjiro," Zenitsu whined. "Before we go further you'll protect me from whatever is in this place, right?" Yoriichi stopped, but didn't turn around. "The demon ahead of us is powerful. Now that I am closer, I can also tell there is more than one demon here. I cannot protect you," Zenitsu wailed. "You will be safe, though," Yoriichi continued, cutting off Zenitsu's panic. "Because you are strong enough to protect yourself." For a moment, Zenitsu stilled and his watery eyes focused on Yoriichi. Then he wailed about empty promises and went back into full panic mode. Yoriichi felt two small presences enter the house and turned. The boy and the girl from outside were running down the hallway towards them. "Stay away," he said. "It isn't safe." "We're sorry, but there were sounds coming from inside that box," the boy said. "It will be fine. What is in there is more precious to me than my life. I would never value something evil," Yoriichi said. "Now please go back." The house shook and Zenitsu stumbled into the girl who stumbled into Yoriichi. Yoriichi and the girl fell through a shoji into another room. Zenitsu apologized, then everything became strange. The walls around him and the girl changed several times. Yoriichi felt the demon presences grow suddenly closer, further away, and then closer again. He gazed through the transparent world and saw that walls, floors, and ceiling were all glowing faintly with demonic energy. Somehow, the demon's power manipulated the house around them. The girl gasped and put her head against Yoriichi's chest. As they cycled through to a final room, one much bigger with strange wooden boxes and chests of drawers on the side, Yoriichi felt the large demon presence draw very near. It was standing right outside of the room they were in. "Get behind one of the crates and hide," he ordered as he drew his sword. The girl didn't move. Yoriichi gave her a gentle push towards the largest crate and she stumbled over to it, tucking herself between it and another crate. "I will protect you like Zenitsu will protect your brother," Yoriichi promised. "If I may, what's your name?" "Toroko," the girl whispered. "Stay strong, Toroko. We will all make it out of this fine," he said. The sound of loud stomping came through the shoji. Seconds later, a tall demon could be seen through the doorway. Its chest was bare and it wore only two long pieces of cloth around its waist, woven together with a rope to form a sort of long loincloth. Each shoulder had a drum on it, and there was another one on the side of his legs. A fifth perched on the right side of his belly. If it hadn't been for them for them and their meddling, the demon grumbled. It wasn't facing Yoriichi and did not seem to notice him. Yoriichi knew better. If the demon's power was the house, it would know where people were and how many were in it. Even if it couldn't, even weak demons could smell a human at closer than 10 yards. Curses, curses. Thanks to them he was able to get away. That prey belonged to me and me alone, the demon muttered. Why do uninvited guests keep barging into someone else's home? That prey is mine. I grabbed it with my own hands on my own property. A child merchai that I found myself. Yoriichi was done listening. He leaped forward, swinging his sword in a swift arc. The demon tensed and raised a hand to its drum. Yoriichi's blade changed direction and severed the hand. But it was too late. The hand had already hit the drum. The room suddenly shifted and Toroko screamed. Yoriichi bounced off one of the walls, now the new floor, and caught the girl as she fell. He eased her down between two of the newly positioned shelves and faced the demon warily. The demon hissed at him as it shook its bleeding stump. The hand was already starting to regrow. Yoriichi crouched, ready for another attack, then froze. Another presence was rocketing towards them. It wasn't demonic, but it felt stronger than most normal humans. What? Loud, harsh laughter broke through the shoji, followed seconds later by a boy wearing a boar hide complete with a full boar mask over his own head. The blades he clutched were undoubtedly Nichiren, but were serrated rather than a single continuous blade. He started yelling to the demon, saying something about it serving as a catalyst for his own glory. Yoriichi tuned him out and focused on him in the transparent world. Sure enough, the enlarged, strong lungs of a demon slayer were in his chest. Hopefully, that meant he now had a second ally to take on the demon. The demon regarded the boar-headed newcomer sourly. How maddening. All these cursed insects running amok in my house, it snapped. Casually, it tapped the drum on its left hip several times. The room spun 180 degrees, making all three humans fall downwards. Yoriichi twisted in the air so he would land on his feet and tried to find Toroko. He spotted her pink kimono too late. She landed on the floor with a cry of pain, and the slayer with the boar mask landed with one foot on top of her. The boar slayer started cackling and commenting on the room. Yoriichi slammed into him and knocked him off of Toroko. Are you all right? He asked, pulling her to her feet. Toroko gave a tearful nod. The boar slayer grunted. So fast, didn't even see it coming. He sat up and regarded Yoriichi with what was probably curiosity. Who are you, kid? Yoriichi ignored him and looked at Toroko. He wanted to tell her to hide again, but there was nowhere to hide with the demon moving the room around like this. With at least one other demon around, asking her to flee the room wouldn't work either. Hey, I'm talking to you, the boar shouted. You deaf or something? Slowly, Yoriichi pushed Toroko behind him and turned to face the other slayer. That's more like it. Now I ask you a question. Answer it already. I will not give my name, Yoriichi said. To someone who cares so little for children that he is willing to step on them. You've got spunk. I like that. Having a human send me flying. That's a first for me, the boar slayer shouted. He sprang at Yoriichi and swung his swords, only to strike empty air. Yoriichi had watched the muscles coiled before the leap and moved himself and Toroko out of the way, into one of the corners. Stay here, he said, pushing her between two boxes. The boar slayer started crowing about how his swords would do a lot of damage. Yoriichi tuned him out and watched through the transparent world, waiting for the slayer's body to betray him. That is until the end of the speech. The way they shred through flesh is what I pride myself on the most. And what flesh do they shred? Human or demon? Yoriichi demanded. His eyes narrowed with anger and his warrior self looked out of them. We are demon slayers. We protect humans and kill the demons that would harm them. The one thing a demon slayer should never do is slaughter humans. Who said anything about killing humans? You are picking a fight with me. When there is a girl to protect and a monster to kill, Yoriichi replied. You disgust me. The boar slayer snorted. You think I care? That look on your face, though, that feeling coming off you. You've gotta be super strong. I can't wait any longer. Fight me. The drum demon cut him off. Measly insects. You are irksome. Now die. It hit the drum in the center of its chest and a burst of wind tore between the boar slayer and Yoriichi. Long furrows like claw marks dug into the tatami mat floor, sending woven strands flying. If that had hit one of us, Yoriichi thought, we would be torn to shreds. The demon hit another drum and invisible claw attacked, this one aimed at the boar slayer. It hit the drum on right shoulder and Yoriichi moved himself to the right on a hunch. It worked. His back hit the wall softly as the room rotated. The drums were the indicator, then their location would tell Yoriichi how the room would move. The demon hit the left shoulder drum and Yoriichi used the spinning momentum to launch himself across the room and grab Toroko. Another turn sent the boar slayer flying through a door into the hallway. Then the room changed around Yoriichi and Toroko. The demon's presence felt far away. The drum had teleported them somewhere else. But I didn't see or hear him strike another drum, Yoriichi realized. So how? Toroko gave a soft hiccup and Yoriichi looked down to see her looking at him anxiously. He took her small hand and knelt. "Stay behind me," he said. The girl nodded and Yoriichi opened the nearest door. He looked down at one end of the hallway and saw a crumpled, bloody heap of clothes, flesh and bones. A human body. He said a quick prayer for their soul and then guided Toroko towards the end of the hall, instructing her not to look behind them. Casting out his senses, he felt a human presence not too far away. If there was another human in need of help, he had to get to them. He started in that direction with Toroko following him nervously. Halfway down a hall, one of the smaller demon presences Yoriichi had been tracking winked out. Zenitsu or the boar slayer must have killed it. The other smaller demon presence disappeared as they entered a new hallway. Yoriichi felt a small kernel of hope grow in his chest. Zenitsu and the boar slayer. They were both demon slayers, no matter their quirks. They were doing what they were meant to do. As they neared the presence, Yoriichi heard the sound of a drum banging. Toroko clutched at Yoriichi. Her last memory of drums had come with a demon. If not for the transparent world, Yoriichi might have thought it was the drum demon again too. "We are fine. A friend is waiting on the other side of this door," Yoriichi told her. He slid it open to reveal a boy in an orange haori, gripping a drum like his life depended on it. Toroko peered out from behind Yoriichi and rushed into the room when she saw him. "Kyoshi, we found you," she cried. The boy stared at her in surprise, but when she dropped to the floor in front of him, he reached out for her. "Toroko," he cried. Yoriichi watched the scene with his usual remote face. Inside, a mixture of happiness and longing swirled around. Banishing his feelings, Yoriichi stepped forward, into the room with the siblings. "Who is he?" Kyoshi asked. "Tanjirou Komado," Yoriichi replied. "I'm a demon slayer." Kyoshi stared at him, wide-eyed. "You've done well," Yoriichi said. "Both of you. Please show me your wounds." Cautiously Kyoshi sat up and held out his right leg. A long scratch and several scrapes had torn the skin on his calf. Yoriichi pulled out a small pot of ointment Urokodaki had given him. "This works well," he said. Dipping 2 fingers in the ointment, he started to spread it on the wound. Kyoshi looked nervous. Yoriichi tried to think of something to say, to set the boy's mind at ease. A bit of small talk maybe. He was never any good at that. Eventually he gave up and said the first thing that came to mind. "My teacher who made this. He wears a Tengu mask," Yoriichi said. "Really?" Kyoshi asked. "It is the truth," Yoriichi said. "The ointment is good too. You should feel better soon." After he finished spreading the ointment, Yoriichi pulled a bandage out and wrapped the leg firmly in it. But not too tight. "Feel any better?" he asked. Kyoshi smiled. "Yes, thanks. Please tell me how you came to be here." "If you can," Yoriichi said. The boy's face became fearful and he gulped, but he told the story. According to him, a monster had dragged him away from his sibling and almost ate him. Other monsters, demons, had shown up and began to fight the original over who would get to eat him. The demon with the drum had lost one on his back to another demon and it ended up on the floor by Kyoshi. Kyoshi grabbed it and hit it out of desperation, changing the room and escaping from the monsters. Since then, he'd been hitting the drum at random to keep the demons away. "We just escaped from that demon ourselves. He was talking about you." "Said something about a merchai," Yoriichi said cautiously. The term sounded familiar, but he couldn't quite manage to extract it from his past memories. "Yes, he called me one." "A merchai?" Kyoshi exclaimed. "That term refers to the owner of a rare blood type," Yoriichi's crow exclaimed. The 2 children jumped as the crow fluttered down to land on the floor. Yoriichi had been too focused on sensing demons to notice the crow's comparatively small presence, so he was surprised as well. But the most he did was twitch slightly. Kyoshi and Toroko stared at the crow in a mixture of amazement and disbelief. The crow puffed up its feathers and said, "What's that look about? I'll teach you respect." "Leave me be," Yoriichi ordered. "Tell me more about what you mean by rare blood." He didn't remember much about blood types from his own time period. They might not have even been able to determine types back then. Truthfully, the bird explained that blood types could be divided into groups and that more uncommon types of blood were more nutritious for demons. A merchai is worth 100 humans. A merchai is like a feast for them, a delicacy for the ages, the crow finished. Kyoshi and Toroko looked horrified. Yoriichi nodded, his face remaining impassive. The crow's explanation fit in well with what he knew of demons. The drum demon would be coming for Kyoshi, would turn down demon slayers for him, even if the demon slayer was easier prey. That meant there was only one thing to do. You two stay here and keep hidden. Remember that the demon's ultimate objective is Kyoshi. If you keep using the drum to shift around the house, the demon will be forced to keep changing direction. He will never find you, Yoriichi instructed. What about you? Toroko asked, eyes wide and scared. I am going to end this, Yoriichi said, stepping towards the doorway. Toroko, your brother is worn out and hurt. Protect him. Oh okay, Toroko stammered. Kyoshi, if you hear a noise in the hallway or someone starts to open the door, use the drum to switch rooms, Yoriichi instructed. Kyoshi didn't say anything, but Yoriichi caught movement, so maybe the boy had nodded. Pulling open the door, Yoriichi stepped out into an adjoining room. He regarded the children one last time. This will all be over soon and we'll go out into the sun again. When that happens, the light will chase your demons away. Focus on that. Yoriichi slid the door shut. The two small presences of the children suddenly grew further away. Satisfied, Yoriichi turned to face the door. The demon's presence had grown steadily closer while he had conversed with the children. He hadn't told the children about it, but he had felt its approach. A moment later, the door to his room opened and the drum demon peered around it with one red eye. It cursed when it saw him, but not the children. So infuriating, it growled, striking the drum on its right shoulder twice. Yoriichi leaped into the air as the room turned upside down and landed on his feet. Idly, he noted that the demon always remained attracted to the original floor, as if his own gravity kept him from falling to one side or the other or twirling upside down. The demon launched a claw attack and Yoriichi ducked. It probably expected Yoriichi to be thrown around like a fly in a bottle, but this time, Yoriichi understood the pattern. So when the demon's muscles tensed and he raised a hand to tap the left drum, Yoriichi had already jumped left. The room turned into him and Yoriichi rocketed towards the demons with his sword already swinging. The demon's eyes widened and it hit the middle drum, forcing Yoriichi to roll and miss its neck. The blade did take a chunk out of his side, though. The demon's red eyes bulged and he howled in pain. Before Yoriichi could push off from the floor, the demon raised both arms and began to beat the drums in rapid succession. The room began to spin so fast that one of the drawers in the cabinets opened and papers went flying everywhere. Yoriichi had to jump upwards immediately each time he landed to avoid claw attacks. 5 of them now, not 3, he noted. The demon was moving too fast for Yoriichi to have more than a fraction of a second's head start on him. That fraction kept him alive and moving, but left little room for a counterattack. He needed to find another strategy. Then Yoriichi noticed a pattern. He could see a faint gray-green aura that twisted into shapes according to the drum's beat. Yoriichi observed for a few more rotations, resisting the urge to change his tactics until he knew for certain. A spiral that swirled 3 times to the right before reversing to go left once and straight once. 3 right turns, a left turn, and a claw attack. Another spiral going left twice, then straight, then right, and then straight again. 2 left turns, a claw attack, a right turn, and another claw attack. He'd seen enough. When the next spiral appeared, Yoriichi bounced right and then left and then right, picking up speed as he went, and then flipped over the demon's head, sweeping the sword through his neck to decapitate it in one powerful chop. Yoriichi landed and the demon's head fell on the floor in a puddle of blood. What is your name? Yoriichi asked. Why should I tell you? It spat. Because you deserve to be mourned. You were human once and then you were poisoned and twisted. It isn't your fault, but most won't see it that way. They'll say you were always a monster. I would like to remember you as a person, someone with a name. I don't want to remember you by your blood demon art, as magnificent as it might be. The demon looked at him for a moment. Its neck was started to crumble to ash. Kyogai, it finally said. I am Tanjiro Komado. May your rest be peaceful, Kyogai, and may you find happiness at last, Yoriichi said. As the demon looked at him, Yoriichi saw 2 things in its eyes. The first was the simple gratitude of a dying man who is happy to know he is not dying alone. The second made Yoriichi twitch in surprise. 2 blue pupils had appeared in the demon's eyes, and on one of them was the kanji for 6 with a brutal-looking X slash through it. Yoriichi was looking at former Lower Moon 6. My blood demon art ... Did you really think it was magnificent? Kyogai asked, sounding hopeful. Yoriichi gave a nod and the demon smiled in contentment, then its head faded. Taking out one of the special knives Tamayo had given him, Yoriichi tossed it into the demon's corpse and let the reservoir fill with blood. He pulled it out and watched respectfully as the rest of the demon's body disappeared. Meow, said a voice beside him. Looking down, Yoriichi saw a calico cat with a small backpack and a strange symbol written in paper tied to its chest. "You're from Tamayo, I presume," he said. The cat flicked its tail, then gave a small nod. Carefully, Yoriichi opened the backpack to reveal a small velvet bag built into the lining. He opened it, put the knife full of blood inside, and then cinched it shut again, closing the bag. "You have my thanks," Yoriichi told it. "Travel safely and take care of yourself." The cat gave him a haughty look and then ran off, disappearing into a mist of blood. Yoriichi flicked his sword to clean it of any excess blood and then sheathed it. He took stock of the situation through the transparent world. All the demons were dead. Zenitsu and the boy with him were outside along with the boar slayer. Kyoshi and Toroko were together at the other end of the house. Yoriichi found the two siblings using their locations, calling out their names as soon he came close. He opened the door and barely managed to duck a couple of clay pots and a book the two children threw at him. Yoriichi looked at the two of them. "We're sorry. The drum we were using disappeared, so we panicked," Kyoshi said. "The demon is dead. That's why the drum disappeared," Yoriichi stated. Toroko started to cry. Yoriichi glanced at Kyoshi for help, only to find the same helpless on the boy's face. "Let's go outside," Yoriichi said. "Your other brother is waiting." Toroko nodded and stood up. Kyoshi tried to rise, but his wounded leg crumpled and he fell back on his butt, grimacing in pain. Yoriichi gently picked him up in his arms and carried him down the hall with Toroko following behind them, gripping Yoriichi's Haori. They emerged blinking into the sunlight. When Yoriichi's vision cleared, he saw a strange scene. Zenitsu was wrapped around Nezuko's box, shielding it with his entire body. The boar slayer was yelling at Zenitsu to fight back, punctuating each of his words with a kick to Zenitsu's back. Zenitsu looked at Yoriichi through a blooming black eye and with blood trickling from his nose. "The box," he said. "I protected it. You told me ... this is more important to you than your own life. That's why I did it." Carefully, Yoriichi placed Kyoshi on his feet and signaled Toroko to let her brother lean on her. He turned to see Zenitsu on the ground, still protecting the box, and the boar slayer stomping on him. "You're a fellow demon slayer. Then let's see you fight. If you won't, then get out of my way," the boar slayer shouted. "Fine. If you decide to keep me from doing my job, I'll just have to take you out along with that box." The boar slayer raised one of his serrated swords and prepared to stab Nezuko's box through Zenitsu. Thank you for watching. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a video. And comment down your opinion on this video. Thanks for stopping by and I'll see you in the next one.